Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Adriana sat at home waiting for her mother and father to come home from work. They worked at the poultry farm as laborers. Adriana had already heated her parents' dinner and looked out of her relative's window. Soon the 17-year-old girl saw her mother, followed by her father. Adriana smiled and ran to open the front door. As soon as her parents walked in, Adriana said she wanted to talk to them over dinner. The head of the family looked at her daughter with a stern look and asked, "I hope the conversation is not about your pregnancy." "Daddy, again you have failed to make a joke." A little irritated, said the daughter, who already knew her father's gaze and always distinguished when the gaze is angry. And when deliberately angry in such a situation, the man was not angry. The head of the family on the daughter's answer laughed and said, "You know me and my mother is peeled. Okay, let's set the table and talk over dinner." Soon the family was sitting in the kitchen and talking peacefully. When dinner was about to end, the girl's father asked his daughter what exactly she wanted to say. Adriana hesitated a bit and said that she had changed her mind about going to medical school and wanted to become an interior designer. When the father heard this, he was amazed, because his daughter had been dreaming about medicine since she was 16 years old. And then, when it is already necessary to go to enroll, she changes her mind. And he asked, "Why you choose this particular direction in our village in this specialty? You obviously do not get a job." "I know that, but maybe I'll be lucky enough to make my personal life in the city. And to be honest, I don't really want to go back to the village where there's no future. You're the one who started dreaming about a prince on a white horse, but you are not yet 18 to think about it," said the girl's mother. "Mom, Dad, but I'll be 18 on September 1st, and I'm not saying that I'm going to the city to arrange my personal life right now. Right now, I want to major in design." Parents. The girls looked at each other, and the head of the family did not object to his daughter's choice. He told his wife that Adriana has the right to decide what she wants to be in the future. Adriana's mother looked at her child, then hugged her and asked her to keep her head in the city. The girl gratefully hugged each parent in turn. Soon, Adriana left for the city where she enrolled in college to study design. The girl was given a dormitory as a non-resident. She immediately made friends with her roommate, and soon Adriana began her studies. In college, Adriana especially became friends with fellow student Betty, who lived in this city with her parents. Adriana liked this girl with her carefree character. Time moved imperceptibly, and now the winter vacation was approaching. A week before Adriana's departure to the village, Betty suggested to her to go and sit in a cafe. Adriana supported her friend's idea, as she didn't often visit such places due to lack of money. Her parents sent her some money, but they quickly ran out. Soon the students were sitting in a cafe and discussing how they would celebrate the new year. Betty said that she would go to a nightclub where she would have a good time. Adriana said sadly that she did not have such an opportunity because they had not yet built such entertainment places in the village. Betty looked at her in amazement and then asked, "How do you have fun there? Young people usually go to the club on weekends for discos." "Well, it sucks. I don't envy the villagers," Betty said with a laugh. The girls continued to talk to each other as two young men approached them and offered them company. Betty looked at the boys. Then she looked at Adriana as if to ask if she would be willing to be introduced. Adriana nodded and let her friend know she was okay with it. And in just a few minutes, the guys had already joined the girls. One of the young men was called Konstantin, and the other Stephen. Adriana immediately took notice of Stephen, and the whole evening was sneaking glances at him. Adriana also noticed that her friend liked this guy. Some more time passed, and Adriana told the company that it was time for her to go to the dormitory. The young men sighed disappointedly, and Konstantin said that he and his friend had hoped to go for a longer walk. Adriana responded by suggesting that they should meet tomorrow and just walk outside. Stephen, having heard the suggestion, took up the idea, and then he drove Adriana to the dormitory and then Betty home in his car. Adriana was already lying down to rest, thinking about her new acquaintance, when she received a call on her cell phone from a friend. Betty excitedly described how she had a long conversation with Stephen when saying goodbye. Adriana unknowingly felt jealous of the boyfriend, and suddenly she said, "Classmates, why are you telling me this now? I want to bring it to your attention that I like Stephen, and I saw you looking at him in the cafe. So I'm going to ask you to turn your attention to his friend. Don't tell me what to do. And you're right to point out that I was looking at him because I liked him too. Now I will bring it to your attention that Stephen is an adult, and it's up to him to decide who he wants to spend his time with," Adriana said sharply, and immediately disconnected the connection. The next day, the girls met at the college. They felt that a cat had run between them and did not communicate especially strongly. And in the evening of the same day, when the girls met with their boyfriends, the young men noticed that the girls tried not to communicate with each other. Stephen at first tried to defuse the situation, and then asked what fly had bitten you both. "Yesterday was so much fun, and today it's like a day of mourning. Why don't we break into pairs? I want to go out with Adriana." And after the last sentence, he turned to Adriana and asked, "Do you mind?" "Of course not." With a smile, the girl answered, and looked triumphantly at her friend, who smirked wryly and said quietly, "But it's on. Go for a walk." Adriana got into the car to Stephen, and they went for a drive around the evening city. In the car, the young man asked the girl to tell about herself. She complied with his request, and then the man asked what had happened between the girls. Adriana, "Shit," she said to herself as she did not know what to answer. In the meantime, Stephen looked questioningly at Daddy, said a little fight they had. "Asking what for? Since I won't tell you anyway." "Okay, I won't ask. And anyway, you found out all about me. Why I don't know your background yet." The young man laughed and said that he kept more about himself on purpose, so that there was a reason to meet again. The young woman liked his answer, but insisted that he tell her about himself. From the narrative, Stephen Adriana learned that he is 27 years old, works in a bank. He lives with his mother, but is going to buy a 2-room apartment within a month. About his father, the guy said that his father died last year. And also the young man said that he was married. The marriage lasted only a year. The girl, having heard that Stephen was divorced, asked why he separated from his wife. The interlocutor, after a little thought, replied, "There is a reason that is most often used by people who want to divorce. It is called so. They did not match their characters. I hope that your curiosity satisfied." After a while, the girl said she had to go to the hostel. The man drove Adriana home, and when she was about to get out of the car, he pulled her to him and wanted to kiss her. Adriana pushed the new acquaintance away from her and asked indignantly what he was doing. Stephen looked at the girl perplexed and simply replied that he wanted to kiss the now Adriana. She looked at the young man in amazement and mumbled, "Is it customary for you to kiss a girl on the lips on the second day of acquaintance? What's wrong with that? But we hardly know each other to kiss already," she said quietly. "If you don't want to, I won't. Okay, let's say goodbye. I gotta go too. We'll see each other again, of course, but only after a while, because I have to go on a business trip. I'm going to my parents' house in a few days too. You will call me for sure." Soon, Adriana went to her parents' house in the countryside. She stayed there for the winter vacation. During this time, the guy called her on New Year's Eve, and one more time. The girl was worried that her relationship with Stephen might not work out. She had already realized that she had fallen in love with this man with all her heart. Soon Adriana arrived for her studies. At college, she met up with a friend she hadn't spoken to since Stephen had suggested a walk through the pairs. Adriana thought that their conflict with her friend had already passed during the winter break. So without a second thought, she approached Betty and asked how the girl had celebrated New Year's Eve. Betty arrogantly glanced at her classmate and said, "Why are you wondering? My time about driving. Although I can tell you that I've had a good time these days. I went out with Stephen a couple times. He should be here tomorrow. By the way, what do you mean you met him?" Adriana asked in bewilderment. "You've gone to the country. so he suggested that we spend some leisure time together, and I didn't refuse. Adriana walked away from Betty in silence. She felt a wave of hatred rising in her soul towards her friend, but not towards the young man. Adriana blamed Betty for everything. She believed that it was her classmate who initiated these meetings. After studying, Adriana hurried to the dormitory. She couldn't wait to call her lover, and as soon as she found herself in the room, she immediately dialed Stephen. And when she heard his voice, she asked when he was coming. The guy was surprised at the girl's call and answered that in 2 days, and Adriana asked the question that worried her the most. "Tell me, why did you go out with me? You like Betty, don't you? You're strange, but I liked you. That's why we went out. Let me come over and we'll talk about it." Soon Stephen arrived in town and he met the girl. He looked at Adriana, who had her head down, looking at her hand. The man asked the girl why she had called earlier with this topic of conversation. Adriana kept silent as she did not want to admit to the guy that she was in love with him. And when Stephen pulled the girl to himself and kissed her passionately on the lips, she did not pull away, because at that moment she realized that if she pushed the men away now, Stephen would just leave and never come back. The guy kissed Adriana for a long time, and then the couple went for a drive around the city. After this meeting, a month passed. During this time, Stephen had already bought an apartment and occasionally met Adriana. The girl was angry that the guy came to her so rarely, and he told her in response that he had an emergency at work and had to stay at the bank a lot. Adriana practically did not communicate with her friend. Betty was calm about it and only occasionally made tricky jokes. That Adriana only needed Stephen for a while. Adriana tried not to react to her former friend's words. But one day, when she again heard a rejoinder in her address from Betty, she could not stand it and replied, "You are all angry that the word did not choose you, but that's not my fault. He made his own choice. Why don't you stop bugging me with your sarcastic remarks? You're silly. Pretty soon you'll be crying that you crossed me. Are you saying you'll still claim my boyfriend knowing I'm dating him? You got that right. And if I have to, I'm not going to play hard to get and jump into bed with him," Betty said with a smirk, and immediately went on her way. Adriana stood in a stupor. From this conversation, the girl suddenly realized that Stephen was talking to Betty, since how could the former friend know that she was denying Stephen intimacy? And at the same moment, Adriana decided that she would call her boyfriend right away and offer him to spend the night together. The girl, not thinking long, dialed the guy and said that she wanted to spend the weekend with a sleepover at his place. The man was stunned by this news and instantly agreed. Soon Adriana was making love to Stephen for the first time and for the morning. When she woke up, she did not regret her decision. She wanted now every morning to wake up in the arms of her favorite man and hear from him pleasant compliments. After that night, the man came to the girl's dormitory more often and took her to his place for sleepovers. Adriana already thought that soon they would become husband and wife, and so she told her lover, "We have been dating for almost 3 months. Maybe we should think about getting married. I don't really need a stamp in my passport. We're good together, and that's what matters. You know, I have a question for you too. Tell me, what are you ready to do for love for me?" The young woman thought for a moment, and then in all seriousness answered that she was ready to sacrifice everything, but only to be near him. In response to this confession, the guy smiled and said that nothing had to be sacrificed, and immediately hugging the girl said, "I just want you to make a tattoo on your shoulder, descending roses. It really turns me on in bed, but it's up to you to decide if you want to do it or not. And if you agree to it, I'll draw the sketch of the flower myself. I'll do it. In the meantime, you draw the flower." The next day, the girl found out how much the procedure cost, and after that she called her mother to ask her for money. Adriana did not hide from her mother what she was asking for, and honestly said that she wanted to get a tattoo. Her mother responded by saying that it was stupid to disfigure her body with Adriana's pictures. When she heard the refusal, she continued to me, "It is very important to do it the way a loved one asked for it. You got a boyfriend, and you never even mentioned him once on the phone. How did you start living in the city? Did you become secretive? I'm sorry, but I wasn't ready to tell you about my relationship with this man. Now I'm sure of our feelings for each other. I'll tell you all about Stephen. But now you tell me, will you give me the money or not?" The mother said yes to her daughter. And on the same day, Adriana received a transfer from her parents. After a while, the girl visited a salon and made a tattoo on her right shoulder. She proudly showed the picture on her body to her lover. Stephen enthusiastically appreciated the tattoo and told the girl the cherished words that Adriana was dear to him. A month flew by when Adriana, having got up in the morning, felt indisposed. The girl felt nauseous and had a general feeling of weakness. Adriana barely sat through her classes that day, hurrying to the dormitory to lie down. She hoped that she would feel better the next day. However, it didn't happen. Adriana felt an uneasy feeling in her soul, and then it hit her. What if she was pregnant? After her college class, Adriana stopped by the drugstore and bought a test. When she got to her dorm, she went straight to the restroom where she did the procedure as instructed. And then the girl watched with excitement as 2 blue stripes appeared on the litmus paper. Adriana was unspeakably happy about it. After all, now she was carrying a baby from her favorite person under her heart. And this meant that soon Adriana will become the legal spouse of the chosen one. The young woman immediately called her lover and said that she wanted to see him immediately. The man promised the girl that as soon as he was free, he would come. Adriana waited with excitement for the chosen one to tell the glad tidings, and as soon as she saw Stephen, immediately hugged him and in his ear whispered the news about the baby. The man pulled away from the embrace and looked at the girl unhappily. Then he asked what Adriana was going to do about it. The young woman looked at the boy perplexed and said firmly that she was going to give birth. Stephen was a little down after the words of the girl, which did not escape Adriana's attention. And she asked him a question. "Are you not happy about it?" "I don't know how to answer that. It's just that the news was unexpected, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Since you decided to have a baby, we probably need to legalize the relationship so that the baby is born in a complete family, where there is a mom and dad. These are exactly the words I've been waiting to hear from you when you need to introduce me to your mom. And then I'm gonna call my parents and invite them over, and they're gonna rent an apartment here for a couple days. You and I need to get married as soon as possible, before I get a belly." Soon Stephen introduced Adriana to his mother Kathy. Adriana tried to be friendly with her future relative, but she intuitively sensed that the woman didn't like her. Adriana thought to herself that Adriana's mother was probably just not ready for her son to remarry and was therefore a little belligerent toward her. Meanwhile, Kathy began to ask the young couple when they were going to get married. Stephen replied that initially they would wait for Adriana's parents and then they would apply at once. The landlady nodded in response and immediately said, "Son, I won't discourage you from taking this step, but I think you're rushing the wedding. You don't know each other well enough to be a family. But if you've made this decision, I insist that there be no wedding. I just want you to get married without the formal part. Your father and I already spent a lot of money on your first wedding. I wasn't planning on having a big party. I was just going to get married and sit with my relatives in a cafe. And we're in a hurry to apply to the registry office for one reason only. Adriana is expecting a baby. You have a rare young person, as I see," Stephen's mother said coldly and looked at her future daughter-in-law with a piercing look. As soon as Adriana and her chosen one went outside from Kathy, the young woman told the man with annoyance that she would like to have a wedding, not a party. The young woman added that she was getting married for the first time and would like to be in a white dress on that day. Stephen replied that it was only a waste of finances to play a wedding now. The young woman tried to object to the young man, but he interrupted her and said, "You know very well that I have recently purchased real estate. I had savings, but not enough to buy an apartment. So I had to take out a loan from the bank. Now you think about it. How much money are we going to use for the party? Or maybe your parents will give us money to throw a wedding. No, they can't help us because they don't make much money. Then we'll never speak of it again. Soon Adriana called her parents and invited them to come to meet her fiancé. Only the girl's mother came. The woman blessed her daughter and promised that she and her father would already come to the marriage ceremony. Adriana was happy that now her mother is familiar with her favorite person. After a while, the young people filed an application in the registry office. Then the newlyweds celebrated the marriage ceremony in one cozy cafe, where only the closest relatives were present. After Adriana became the legal spouse of Stephen, then she moved to live in her husband's apartment. Time slowly went on. The first half of the pregnancy, the young woman felt good. But when the second trimester began, then the doctor said that she needed to lie in the hospital for preservation. And as a result, Adriana was often in the hospital almost until the birth. The young woman gave birth prematurely, a baby girl, which she and her husband named Christina. While in the hospital, Adriana learned that her daughter had kidney disease. The young woman was very worried about this and asked Our Lady only for the health of her little girl. In connection with the girl's illness, Adriana stayed in the hospital for a long time, and after discharge, the attending doctor immediately said that now it was necessary to carefully monitor her daughter's condition and to act precisely according to the instructions of the medical staff. The young woman, as soon as she found herself at home, realized that she was not ready to cope with maternal duties alone. Adriana approached her husband and asked him to talk to her mom about staying with them for a while. Stephen, after listening to the request, responded by telling Adriana to call on her own. She was offended by her husband's words and told him, "You must be forgetting that Christina is your daughter. You see that the baby cries a lot. And I, because I became a mom for the first time, do not know how to act in this or that situation. You yourself wanted this baby, so you should be ready for all the surprises. There are internet forums and literature. Here, sit and learn how to babysit a baby. And after all, you have your own mother to turn to. But my mom works, and your mom is retired. Okay, I'll talk to my mother-in-law myself." Hiding irritation, said the girl. And in a few minutes, Adriana dialed Kathy's number. As soon as she picked up the phone, the daughter-in-law asked her to come to visit. The pensioner asked what was the purpose. Adriana almost responded by cursing her mother-in-law, but then she pulled herself together and politely said, "Just to check on your granddaughter. And in fact, I would like with you in confidence you can come tomorrow." "I will try," said the interlocutor, and immediately disconnected the connection. Adriana waited all the next day, but her mother-in-law didn't show up. Kathy came only 2 days later. She entered the apartment and glanced at her granddaughter and asked her what her daughter-in-law wanted from her. Adriana did not go around. Yes, she told her that she needed help. She explained that she could not cope with the duck, as the child only in her arms behaves calmly, and she has to do laundry, ironing, and cooking at home. Adriana asked her mother-in-law to come to them at least 3 times a week for 3 hours. Kathy didn't say a word. She listened and then said thoughtfully that she never thought her son would marry a country bumpkin who couldn't be a mother and a good housewife. Adriana felt anger boiling up inside her after her mother-in-law's words. But mentally she forced herself to calm down and said aloud, "I realize you don't like me, but your son made a choice and fell in love with me. And we live together. Soulmate. And I brought you here to ask for help, not to discuss me. Stephen and I are raising your granddaughter. You know, your granddaughter, not some stranger's girl. And that's the only reason I'm asking for your help. I don't need to make any pretty speeches right now. I'm a mother too, and I raised my son without any help from my family. I think you are just lazy as you don't have time to do everything when the baby is sleeping. Your son was not born sick like Stephen and I were, and you didn't have to give medications on a strict schedule. That's one thing. And secondly, our daughter sleeps restlessly if she lies in the crib any rustle, and the baby wakes up. and Christina sleeps serenely only when she is in my arms. And so I just do not have enough time for household chores, as I am always with my daughter in my arms. You don't have to beg me with tears. I can come over twice a week for a couple hours. Now I have to go." Adriana saw her mother-in-law off and breathed a sigh of relief. She was even glad that the old woman would come twice a week, and as soon as her husband arrived, Adriana informed him that she had spoken to his mother and they had agreed. Stephen nodded in agreement. It had been a month since Kathy had visited Adriana. And then the elderly woman told her sister-in-law that she was leaving for the sanatorium, so she would not come the day after tomorrow. Adriana looked at her mother-in-law in astonishment and was surprised, as there had been no talk about the sanatorium before. Adriana decided not to focus on it and tried to distract herself from these thoughts. A few days passed, and Adriana went out for a walk with her daughter. She wanted a stroller and quietly wrote her daughter. As suddenly stopped digging, the young woman saw her mother-in-law, who was getting out of her car. Kathy did not see her daughter-in-law. She was in a hurry to go to a fashion boutique. Meanwhile, Adriana could not get away from the fact that she had just seen a relative who was supposed to be in a sanatorium. Adriana came home after the walk in a bad mood. She wanted to tell her husband that her mother was a two-faced person, but she could not say anything because her daughter suddenly began to cry. And when Adriana touched the baby's forehead, she realized that the child had a fever. The woman called an ambulance, and she and Christina were hospitalized. As it turned out, subsequently the girl's kidneys made themselves known. Adriana spent a long time with her daughter in the hospital. After discharge, expensive medications were required. The man was angry that so much money was spent on pills and injections. Adriana saw that all this unnerved her loved one and calmed him as much as she could, saying that Christina would soon get better. However, 6 months later, the girl became ill again, and once again Adriana and her daughter went to the hospital. Stephen this time very rarely visited his wife and child. He told his wife that he had a lot of work at the bank. Adriana only sighed bitterly in response. After a while, the young woman and her daughter were discharged. The doctor immediately informed Adriana that surgery would likely be required if a recurrence occurred. Adriana replied that if it had to be done, she and her husband were ready. Time moved on, and Christina had already turned 1.5 years old, and the young woman already thought that the girl's disease had receded forever. But her expectations were not justified, as her daughter became ill again. And here is another hospitalization. This time Adriana already knew that there would be an operation and was ready for it. Soon the girl was operated. The doctor immediately informed the mother that now it will be necessary to go through a long rehabilitation period. The medic, after the discharge of the child, gave the woman a full list of instructions, how the daughter should be cared for. Adriana with Christina returned home. The girl was glad that now the hospital walls are behind her. She really hoped that her daughter would recover completely. And when she and Christina were taken from the hospital by her husband, she said so. Stephen only gave her husband a sullen look after these words. Life went on from there. Adriana tried to be a model wife and always welcomed her husband home from work. However, Adriana began to notice that lately her husband was often late at the bank, and it was also suspicious that Stephen, who was not a fan of nightclubs, suddenly became a regular. The woman tried to talk to her husband on the subject, but he replied, as soon as the conversation on the subject came up, that this way he relieves stress after work. And lately Adriana has noticed another oddity in the behavior of her spouse. When her husband gets a phone call, he often goes out to talk on the stairwell. Woman, it seems suspicious. And when once again Stephen called and he went out, she quietly followed her chosen one. Adriana looked through the peephole and saw that her lover was standing with his back to her and talking to someone. Adriana opened the door a little and listened. Immediately, she heard her husband saying, "Shalva is not mine. I miss you too." As soon as Adriana heard this phrase, she was like an electric shock. She jerked the door open and looked angrily at her spouse. The man turned around and immediately assessed the situation. Stephen asked his spouse to come into the apartment and not to make a fight here. Adriana forced herself to do it, and as soon as her husband followed her into the hallway, she turned to him and wanted to slap him. But Stephen managed to intercept her hand, saying, "You're behaving like a countrywoman. Didn't you realize earlier that I had a woman on the side? We're civilized people and have a right to privacy. Are you saying that I can have a lover and go to him and have a good night out? You can't, as you're the one who has to keep the family home safe. And I, for your information, am the only one who brings money into our budget. And you're giving me a hard time about it. As soon as Christina turns 3, I'm going to go to work. It's only a couple months away. Don't talk nonsense. Where are you going to work if you haven't finished college? How about selling vegetables at the market? I won't let that happen. I don't need someone pointing a finger at me and telling me that a respectable banker's wife is a slave trader. I don't understand you, but you accused me of cheating. What's the big deal? I was expecting you to have the city permit. I support you and your daughter. I don't have to take your pathetic allowance into account because it's only enough for your medication. I don't beat you like other husbands do and keep you up all night. What else do you want? But you have a mistress. And for your information, I don't want to share you with any woman. If you don't hear me now, I will." With tears shouted the young woman and rushed to the kitchen, and after a few minutes returned back, presenting a knife to her wrist. Adriana did not say anything at that moment, but only looked at her husband, who realized from the look on his wife's face that she would do what she had planned. Stephen smiled gently at his wife and asked her to put down the cold weapon. And then the head of the family said that at this time they had overreacted. It is necessary to calm down and talk. The man, after these words, approached his wife and took the knife from her hands. Then he hugged her bare shoulder and gently kissed her where the tattoo was. The woman cried and snuggled into her husband's chest. Stephen stroked his wife's hair and asked her to stop shedding tears. Suddenly, the landlord lifted the face of the chosen one and said that he had an idea. Adriana, with tears in her eyes, she asked, "What do you want to propose?" "You should go to the village to your parents. You and Christina at least a little air and not be gassed by the air. It would do our daughter good. Especially you said yourself that soon we'll register for kindergarten, and she needs to gain strength before that. And where to do that? Not in the country. I'll think of something about your labor activity." Adriana listened to her husband's proposal in suspense and then exclaimed with indignation that Stephen had chosen her on purpose. She lived in the village so that she could have fun with other women. As if the man was ready for these words, so he hugged his wife again and gently in her ear said, "Do not talk nonsense. I'll even stay with you in the village for a few days. You and I are radically changing our lives for the better. I will not have any more trips to the side." "Did you mean it just now?" "Of course I mean it. Go ahead, call your mother and tell her you're coming soon. I'll take a few days off work tomorrow." Soon Adriana and her husband and daughter were in the village. Stephen stayed with his mother-in-law for 3 days and then returned to the city. When leaving, the man told his spouse that he would call every day. Adriana anxiously accompanied her beloved home. She was afraid that he would start seeing his mistress again. However, Stephen, as promised, called his wife every day and asked how she and her daughter spent their time. A month and a half had passed since Adriana had been living in the village with her daughter. The young woman missed her husband very much. And so, when he called and said that he was going home, Stephen did not particularly welcome his wife's decision, said that it would be possible to stay in the village longer. But Adriana refused and resolutely said, "If you do not come for us, in 2 days we will go ourselves with Christina." "No need, I will take you," replied the head of the family. 2 months had passed since Adriana had returned with her daughter from the village. During this time, they celebrated her birthday. Christina enrolled the girl in kindergarten. Stephen continued to work at the bank, and Adriana took care of household chores. Soon the young woman was bored with everyday life, and she turned to her husband. "You promised me a job. Isn't it time to do it? Is it bad for you to stay at home? I'm bored. I feel like a dependent." "Okay, I'll look into it one of these days." Adriana, after her husband's answer, hugged him and rejoiced in her heart. The woman piously believed that now there was a white streak in their family, and there would be no more sorrow. However, she was mistaken, because 2 weeks after this conversation, her daughter fell ill, and the girl was taken straight from kindergarten to the hospital. Christina's right kidney, Adriana, fell ill. After learning all the details from the doctor, she couldn't believe that her girl was back in the hospital bed. The woman questioned the doctor. How is this possible? After all, Christina had undergone surgery on this organ. The doctor answered the girl's mother using medical terms, and Adriana understood almost nothing from the words of the doctor. The woman was worried about her daughter's condition, and it was doubly hard for her when she visited Christina and the girl asked not to leave her alone. Adriana tried to explain to the child that the doctor wanted to help her, but could do it only in the hospital. The daughter, though, listened to her mother's words, but still asked her mother to stay with her again. The young woman realized that it was simply impossible to explain to her 3-year-old daughter to stay in the hospital. And once again, when Adriana came to visit Christina, the girl whimpered and began to ask to go home. The young woman, as before, began to soothe the child. She herself could hardly hold back her tears. This dialogue was observed by the post-nurse, who approached Adriana and said, "I understand you very well, how hard it is for you. I can only help in one way. When there will be my night shift, I will allow you to sleep with the girl in the room. I'll warn you that you'll have to sleep on a chair or a couch. But I'll do chairs in the hallway or even on the floor. How much do I owe you for this?" The nurse did not answer, but only smiled. Adriana immediately went to her daughter and told her that she would spend the night with her, but not every day. The little girl clapped her hands joyfully, and the mother at that moment thought how little a child needs for joy. Adriana. Now once every 4 days she slept over at her daughter's house. All other days the young woman was also at the hospital with Christina during the day. Adriana gave herself completely to caring for the girl. What was the use of a spouse who had taken a mistress? The woman found out about it by accident. It happened as follows. Adriana, as always, went to a sleepover with her daughter. But it turned out that the nurse was sick and was replaced by another nurse. Adriana tried to persuade the girl in the white coat to let her stay with Christina until morning. But the nurse replied that she had no right to do so and did not want to be reprimanded for making such a decision arbitrarily. Adriana had nothing left to do but to go home. The young woman quietly opened the door to the apartment and heard a woman's laughter. Adriana stopped like a halt. She listened and immediately recognized the guest's voice. It was her former college friend, who said it would be nice to be with you all the time and enjoy making love. "But that's what we do with you," in an excited voice, Stephen replied. Adriana didn't wait for Betty's reply and flashed into the living room where the couple was. Sitting on the couch in an embrace, Adriana threw herself at her rival, intending to claw at her hair. She was not allowed to do this. Spouse, who instantly oriented the man, hugged his beloved, and asked him to calm down. The young woman tried to break free, screaming that she was about to be torn to shreds by this mistress. Then Stephen commanded Betty, "Pack up and leave. We'll take care of this ourselves." The guest, smiling wryly, got up from the couch and sent a kiss to her former friend and went into the hallway. A few minutes later, the couple only heard the front door slam. Only after that, Stephen let go of his wife, who looked at him angrily. Adriana only wanted to shout hurtful phrases to her husband, but he beat her to it. "Pull yourself together. What did you want? You're always ending up in hospitals. You don't care about me. And I, too, need care and a woman's affection." That's what I found with Betty. So while I take care of my sick daughter and have fun, so like she's begging you for expensive medication, and you can afford champagne, which costs a lot of money. How am I supposed to understand you? I give all of myself only to you and my daughter, and you're saving me such a pig. I'm asking you, let's not use big words and mutual insults. It's just that I've already explained to you that I lacked female attention. Now I'll give you a woman's attention in hysterics," said the young woman and rushed to the window, which opened wide. Adriana quickly climbed on the windowsill and fervently said, "If you lack attention, you will have it. I'm about to step off the 3rd floor and you'll be alone with your daughter. That's when you will have attention, because Christina will stay with you and you will have to take care of her. And if you fulfill your fatherly duties well, our daughter will provide you with care in your old age. Then you'll have a woman's attention in your old age. Think of your daughter. Why do you only care about yourself?" The man said, and made a step towards his wife. And at the same moment he heard the exasperated voice of his wife. "Stay away. We need to clarify the relationship once and for all. You have to promise to stop going to women. You know very well that I can do this deed at this moment." The man saw that his wife was in a hysterical state, and Stephen decided that now was not the best occasion to clarify the relationship. So he constantly apologized to his beloved and got down on one knee in front of Adriana, quietly saying, "Come down. I only now realized how much we love each other, and also realized that how much grief I'd brought you in this life. I'm sorry." Adriana looked incredulously at her lover, who continued to speak beautiful words. The young woman distrustfully stretched out her hands to him, and the man hurriedly removed his wife from the windowsill. He promised that he would have no more liaisons with women on the side. Adriana, hearing Stephen give her his word, immediately cried out, "And you already promised me that. What happened in the end? I find you alone with Betty. I told you it wouldn't happen again. Let's talk about your daughter. Tell me how she's doing." As soon as they talked about the girl, Adriana forgot about what had happened here the other day. The young woman told her that she had not been able to stay with her daughter for the night, and immediately told her that there was good news. Adriana said that Christina would be discharged in 2 days. The man, after his wife's words, hugged her and noted that the latest news is joyful. Soon the girl was discharged. Adriana put her daughter back in daycare and reminded her husband about the conversation about work. A few days passed after Christina was discharged, and Adriana noticed that her spouse was now dropping calls when called, and after a while would lock himself in the bathroom with the phone. Adriana had a woman's intuition that her husband was doing this for a reason. He clearly continues to communicate with Betty even though he doesn't see her, as the chosen one was on time from work. Adriana realized that there was no point in talking to her husband about his communication with his ex-girlfriend, and the girl decided that it was worth talking to her mother-in-law about it. Adriana took her daughter to kindergarten in the morning and immediately went to Stephen's mother. Kathy met her daughter-in-law warily, as the daughter-in-law rarely showed up unannounced. The landlady invited her into the hall and asked what had brought Adriana to visit. The young woman did not go around and around, but said straight away, "Your son is cheating on me. I'd like you to influence Stephen. I've spoken to him several times, but our conversation is going nowhere. Stephen keeps looking at other women. I wonder about that in particular." With a chuckle, Kathy said, and immediately continued, "If my son is not satisfied, how can I influence him? I see only one way out. You need to divorce, and the whole problem will be solved." "What do you mean, divorce? Stephen and I have a child together. Besides, my daughter's not in good health. And on top of all that, I love my husband. Stephen is now in a relationship with an ex-girlfriend of mine. And believe me, she has no interest in your son. Betty is just trying to get back at me because Tikhon chose me over her. All I'm asking you to do is talk to your son, because his family is falling apart. I know Stephen listens to your word. Everything you've told me hasn't touched me in the slightest. But for my part, I promise I'll talk to my son. I think this is the end of our conversation, because I have to go to the tourist center. By the way, I wanted to tell you that you should go to the gym too, since you have some extra pounds that don't look good on you." Adriana did not reply to her mother-in-law's barbs. The young woman hurried to leave Kathy's apartment. Adriana thought that a conversation between mother and son would at least change the situation, and perhaps after a dialogue with her mother, her husband would stop communicating with Betty. In the meantime, Kathy, 2 days after the arrival of her daughter-in-law, called her son and asked him to come alone. Stephen complied with his mother's request, and in the evening, having warned his wife that he would be late, went to his mother. And now the man sits opposite his mother in the living room and looks at her questioningly. The elderly woman smiled at her son and asked how his family relations were. Stephen shrugged and mumbled that it wasn't bad. And at the same moment, Kathy sternly mumbled that she would like to know the true answer. And at once added the daughter-in-law, "The other day she complained to me that you were truanting. Tell me, why should I listen to this from the village Lockhorns? I don't know why she came to you. I'm not seeing anyone at the moment, and I'm tired of it all." "Of what exactly?" the landlady asked calmly. "I'm tired of the constant whims of my daughter. I realize that she is sick, but I cannot bear to hear often her crying. I'm sick and tired of my wife constantly controlling my every move. You know very well I like variety, and I've been known to go out on the side. But she knew that when she got married. Now she wants a model family man who admires only her. If things are so bad, why don't you just get a divorce? Make her choose. Either Adriana accepts you for who you are, or you work things out and live each on your own. It's so easy for you to talk about it. I've thought about it before and even said I was entitled to my own space. So she started scaring me about taking her own life," the man said irritably and rubbed his temples nervously with his palms. "It is possible that your spouse is manipulating you with such actions. They are simple threats to make you live by her rules. Women often use such tricks, but they don't really mean to take their own lives. Mom, did you see her when she grabbed the knife? One more careless word from me and Adriana would have carried out her threat. And to test the fate of a wife who would or would not do such a thing. I have no desire to do so. Imagine her throwing herself out of a window in front of me. How would I live with that for the rest of my life? I'm in a vicious circle and I don't know how to get out of it. I just don't have the energy." "Okay, well, don't lose heart. I'll think about what to do about the situation." After talking to his mother, Stephen went home, where Adriana was waiting for him. The girl immediately, as soon as she saw her husband, asked why he went to Kathy. The head of the family did not talk about the topic of the conversation and lied to the chosen one that his mother asked him to come to fix the plumbing. Adriana immediately hinted that the lover lied, since in such cases the mother-in-law always called the master. They invited her son to help. Several days passed. Adriana still saw that Stephen continued to communicate with the former girlfriend, and she gave him a scandal, reminding him that he would kill himself if he did not stop behaving like that. The man, barely containing his irritation, explained to his wife that Betty herself was calling him and asking to talk to her. Adriana offered to let her talk to Betty herself. Stephen only wanted to answer the chosen one. His mother called and asked him to come over. The head of the family, after a short conversation with his mom, said that yes, they are talking on the subject. As soon as he returns from Kathy, Adriana, before leaving, asked what was the occasion for which his mother called him. At this late hour, the man pronounced that he did not know and would tell her when he returned. Soon Stephen was at his mother's house and told her about the altercation with his wife. The man told it all in an irritated tone. Kathy could see that his son really couldn't bear to live like this. The older woman shook her head and said, "I have an idea. Your wife is afraid of losing you. Perhaps she really loves you with some special love, that she is ready to stop living if you are not around. But you can send your spouse to a remote village where there is no cell phone service for a while, ostensibly to heal the daughter, but only for a long time. And it is quite possible that she will meet a man there with whom she will fall in love. This is not a solution, as I sent her to the village to her parents. She lived there for a month and a half and dreamed, and only about me." With bitterness replied the son, Wait to immediately cancel this option, which I suggested. First, when Adriana was at her parents', there was a connection, and we called every day, not letting each other forget about themselves. And secondly, she was only away for a month and a half. And in my case, I proposed to take her to the middle of nowhere for 6 months, while inventing a fairy tale for her. The conspirator mumbled Kathy and looked at his son with a testing look. The man hesitated. The landlady did not hurry him. She realized that Stephen had to think things over carefully to make a decision. About 20 minutes passed before Stephen spoke. He said to his mother, "Perhaps there is truth in what you say, and it is worth the risk of doing something like this. But where would I find such a place? And then how can I persuade Adriana to go there? After all, she will think that I live on her right side on purpose, so that I can have fun in my absence. On the subject of persuasion, then here is my motherly advice to you. For a start, become for a time approximately husband, at least for a month. Give Adriana gifts. Pay as much attention to your daughter as you can. You have to put your spouse's attention to sleep so that she believes that there is harmony in the family again. And by no means even socialize with yourselves. Tell them you're in the middle of a divorce so they won't bug you for a while. Now, as to where to find such a place, I think the ideal would be to take your spouse to a remote village where there is no communication, but there is a witch doctor. This way, you'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. On the one hand, maybe this nickname will cure Christina, and on the other hand, you'll probably achieve a painless divorce. And if it doesn't work," barely audible, said Stephen, "then you will live and be happy with your Adriana, whom you chose to marry. You have no other option how to act in this situation. So do it." Stephen thanked his mother for her cooperation and was about to leave. Just then, he remembered that he had promised his wife to tell her why he had called his mother to his house. Kathy laughed and said that her son was still an unreasonable child, although he often changed partners. And then the older woman added that Adriana had to tell part of the truth. The man looked at his mother with incomprehension, who said, "Tell her that you had an explanatory talk with you about the fact that you do not devote enough time to your family, and also scolded you about cheating. Let Adriana think I'm on her side. Now go with God to your beloved." Stephen soon arrived home and was immediately approached by his wife about his trip to his mother. The man told his wife as Kathy had advised, and the head of the household instantly caught the mood of his wife, who was amused. Stephen thought to himself what a wise mother he had. Adriana, in turn, mentally thanked her mother-in-law that she did not stand aside and stood up for her. Time moved forward unhurriedly. Adriana could not enjoy family life. Her husband often began to say compliments to her, tried to help with household chores, often played with his daughter, which was previously very rare. All these changes in the behavior of the spouse caused enthusiastic Adriana, and she decided to thank her mother-in-law for her help. The young woman bought a bouquet of flowers and a small cake. Then she called Mother Stephen and asked permission to come over. Kathy said in a unified voice that it was not necessary to warn her about her visit, and she could come whenever she wanted. And a short time later, Adriana was sitting at her mother-in-law's house, saying thank you to the landlady. The elderly woman listened to her daughter-in-law and realized that her son had done the right thing, as the daughter-in-law believed that her spouse had completely changed. And as soon as Adriana stopped talking, the mother-in-law uttered, "I am glad that you are doing well. Now you and your husband need to work on your daughter's health. Maybe find a healer. A lot of people are turning to them these days. You know, my husband just told me that the day before yesterday. You must have told him that, right?" "Yes," Stephen called and we talked about it. "But you're a mother, and you're the only one who can make that decision. I would do anything for my daughter's health. Thank you again for everything. I can't believe we're having this kind conversation right now." Soon, Adriana returned home. She was anxiously awaiting her husband's return. And as soon as Stephen appeared in the apartment, she told him about her visit to her mother-in-law. The head of the family hugged her husband and said that he had made some inquiries and found a healer who lived in a remote village, Adriana looked at her husband with interest and asked him to tell about this healer. The husband sat down in a chair and said that in one village there lived an old man who helped people, but he had to live with him for a while to get rid of the disease. And the man added that there are rumors about this healer that he cures even hopelessly ill people. The girl, hearing this, smiled happily and told her husband that it was necessary to go to this healer. The husband was satisfied, nodded and replied that tomorrow he would contact this grandfather. A day later, Stephen said that he had to go to the old man's village to make arrangements for the healer to see them. Adriana sadly asked the chosen one whether it was impossible to call this man. The head of the family said that there was no connection where the old man lived. There was nothing left for the girl to do but to accept her husband's decision. It was 3 days before Stephen left for the country, and now he had returned home. The man told his wife that the healer was waiting for them. The woman asked how long she would be in the wilderness. Stephen replied that the healer would give her the exact answer. But the same man warned her that it would be at least 2 months for sure. Adriana became upset after these words. This was noticed by the head of the family and asked why she became sad. The girl replied, "We will be with you in separation, and I will not even hear your voice. Think not about that now, but about the fact that we will cure Christina, and you're gonna hear my voice every day. I'm gonna record your speech for you, but you'll get that tape when you're already living at Grandpa's house." Wow, that's a great idea. Now get your things together. We're gonna have to leave soon. You know, it's a good thing we decided to send you and your daughter to this healer over the summer. A few days later, Adriana, her husband and daughter were on their way by car to the village. The woman dreamed of only one thing: that time would fly by, and she would return home with a healthy daughter, and she and her husband would never be separated for such a long period of time again. And Stephen mentally thanked fate that everything was going so smoothly. Soon the car pulled onto the village roads and raced over the bumps. The man mentally thanked that he had to drive on such a broken road. The wife saw that her husband resented it and tried her best to calm him down. After a while, the car entered a small village. Stephen stopped at an extreme hut and asked his wife to stay in the car. He himself got out of the car. Stephen approached the house where he was chopping wood. There was a man in the yard. Adriana's husband approached the stranger. "Hello, sir. We're looking for Christopher. Where can we find him?" "Strangers. You can tell you've come to see him for treatment, but he's not here. It's Thursday, which is the day he goes into town every 2 weeks to get supplies. Today's the day. Can you tell me where his house is? You can tell he's not from around here. He has an old hut here, but he doesn't live here much. Christopher lives in the woods. He's a woodsman and a wanderer in one. Help me get my wife and child there. Christopher knows we're coming. A friend of mine arranged it, but he forgot to tell me that on Thursdays the healer goes into town. And I'll pay you well for this favor. I just don't have time to wait here for a healer. There's plenty of work to do in town. Well, if you pay me, that's good, but you can't get there by car. It's a boat ride down the river. And believe me, that's a lot of gasoline. And I'll tell you right away, I'm not going to wait there for long. I'll just take you back to the village. I've got a lot to do too. I can see that. I'll pay for the gas too. But please do not say anything unnecessary to my wife for this additional payment." The interlocutor looked at Stephen suspiciously and nodded his head. And then the man told him to wait for a while. In the meantime, Stephen went to the car, took out his things, and asked his spouse to get out of the car, explaining to her that they would now drive the motor. Adriana was surprised and wanted to ask him some questions, but he firmly replied that it was not the time to talk. 15 minutes later, the woman and her child were already getting into the motor. Stephen immediately warned that the wigs would not go as he was seasick. Adriana asked her husband in farewell when he would eat them. The head of the household replied that he would arrive here in a month and live here for a week. This message from her husband cheered up the woman's spirits, and she sent him an air kiss, Soon the motor was pumping away from the shore. The woman clasped her daughter to her side and regarded a glimpse of the scenery. She thought about the fact that she would have to spend so much time without the person she loved. The thought made her sad, but the woman tried to shift her attention to the fact that her daughter's health depended on this trip. How long the boat ride Adriana didn't clock, but she felt that her legs had already clocked up. That's when the woman asked the man how much farther to the destination. The counselor replied that one more turn and they would arrive, and already Adriana and her child had landed on dry land. The man pointed to a tube and said that it was necessary to go up on a hill and there would be a healer's hut. Adriana bewilderedly asked the stranger if he would help her carry her things up to the hut. The man nodded reluctantly, picked up the bag and the child's backpack, and walked down the path. And the woman followed him, leading the child by the hand. As soon as they climbed the hillside, the girl saw an unassuming cabin. Then a sheepdog ran up to them and started barking loudly at her. Adriana was frightened and clung to her daughter, who was already crying with fear. The man softly said flatulence to the dog. "Ugh, don't scare the guests," and after these words turned to his companion. "I will lead you into the house, and you will wait there. I don't have time to stay here. I've got a lot to do, and it's a long way home, as you've already noticed. Don't be afraid of the dog. The dog is smart." In a few minutes, the woman and the child were already in the hut. Adriana looked around the house and thought that this was where she would have to spend 2 months, maybe more. The woman was a little stunned. So since she thought she would be living in the village, but it turned out to be in the middle of nowhere. It was already evening when Adriana heard the sound of a motor. She realized that Christopher had arrived. The young woman mentally prepared herself for the meeting with the healer. As soon as the man entered the hut, the girl immediately said hello. The grandfather looked at the guest and not friendly asked what she was doing here. Adriana was confused by this question and inarticulately said that there was an agreement about her arrival. Christopher lit a makeshift lamp, illuminated the woman's face, and then said sternly, "And with whom I wondered that I will have a young person, and even with a child. You are doctors, the hotel, and my husband recently came to you to help us cure our daughter. He said he'd have to stay here for a while, and that's the instruction you gave him. That's the most heresy I've ever heard in my life. All right, I can see the raid already. You're not getting out of the house. You're gonna be here till morning, and then you're gonna show me all of your daughter's medical records. I'll see if there's anything I can do to help, and then we'll decide what to do with you. One more thing, nobody made any arrangements with me about you. Now I'll quickly prepare dinner, then we'll put the baby to bed, and you'll tell me everything in detail. But maybe my friend made arrangements with you through an acquaintance, not directly." With tears in her eyes, said the woman, "I have already explained to you that I did not have such a conversation on this topic. Let's understand everything a little later." After these words, the man began to sort out the products that he brought from the city, and then he made a small fire outside where he piled sausages and potatoes on a frying pan. And after that, Christopher invited the woman and her daughter to have dinner. Soon Christina was put to bed, and the elderly man asked to tell how the woman found herself here. He listened to the guest's story and began to clarify what Stephen had said about him. Then he asked the grandfather a few questions that interested him. "Tell me, my dear, if your husband had made an arrangement with me about you, why did I not meet you then? And also, why didn't your husband himself bring you here and wait for me? I don't know. Perhaps you had urgent business and had to leave, and he didn't come here because he's been seasick since childhood. Don't you find your own answers funny? What do you want me to say? I don't understand what's going on." Crying bitterly, the young woman said, "Calm down." The grandfather whispered further, so that Adriana would not hear. "But it seems to me that I understand everything." The next morning, the old man got up very early. He went to the lake, which was not far from the hut. The grandfather caught fish and boiled some soup, and then went to wake up the woman and the child. Christopher entered the house in a cheerful voice and said that it was time to get up and have breakfast. Adriana did not immediately realize when she woke up. Where was she? The woman looked around confused and immediately remembered yesterday. Adriana wished the healer a good morning and hurried to her daughter, who had already opened her eyes. The elderly man offered to wash her face, guessed from standing water in a bucket, and invited to breakfast. As soon as everyone had eaten, the forester asked for medical documents. He studied them for a long time and then said that there was hope for recovery, but the treatment needed to be done in stages. Adriana looked fearfully at Christopher and told him how long it would take. The interlocutor, smiling, replied that it would take at least 6 months. The woman shrieked and said, "We can't stay in this wilderness without civilization for so long. There are no necessary conditions for a small child to live here, and I am not forcing you to live here. You have to make your own decision. Do you want your daughter to get well or not? That's up to you. I can tell you this about the conditions. During the war, people lived in worse conditions, and mothers would do anything to cure their children. But I have a husband who will worry about me." With tears in her eyes, said the woman. Husband said, "Come on. Tell me about your life with him, while I prepare a potion of herbs. For your daughter, only one agreement, that you tell the truth and without any exaggerations." The woman lowered her head and began her story in a quiet voice. The man, meanwhile, was pulling out various pouches from the right basket, which he spread out on a makeshift section on the board. From the outside, it might have seemed that the healer was only busy with his work, but it was not so. Christopher listened attentively to the girl, and as soon as she was silent, said, "You know what I'll tell you, dearie. It will sound harsh, but it's true. Your whole life with this Stephen is a misunderstanding. And believe me, you're only here because your husband didn't know how to get rid of you. So when he found out I was helping people, he decided to keep you here. I can even say that your husband is not a stupid man, because he chose a village where there is no communication, so that in the near future you could not contact him. I don't believe that. Stephen and I have an excellent relationship lately. I've even made contact with my mother-in-law, even though I thought it would be impossible." She exclaimed in a passionate tone. "Maybe it can't, and your mother-in-law just has a cunning mind. Well, I will not argue with you. I can offer you only one option to live here for a month. I'll be tutoring your daughter during that time. And you wait for your husband, who said he'd visit you. Then we'll see which one of us was right in our speculation. It's up to you. You tell me to take you now. I'll do it, no problem." The woman thought for a moment, and then realized that there was some truth in Christopher's words. She agreed to the older man's proposal and immediately asked what she had to do. The man laughed in response and said that the only thing she would be required to do was to cook, and if there is a desire, then watch over the vegetable garden. The girl looked at the forester in amazement and asked a question, "Do you have a vegetable garden here?" "Of course, I live here almost all the time. I only go to the village on Saturday with an overnight stay to receive the sick who occasionally come there. Now I'm going, and I'll show you my grounds." It had been a week since Adriana and her daughter, living in the forest wilderness. The woman tried not to think that her husband could have acted in the way the witch doctor had written. She thought there had been a misunderstanding. It even occurred to her that her husband had simply mistaken the healer and brought her to the wrong person. Adriana waited until a month had passed, and she had traveled to the village to see her husband. The week before she met Stephen, her grandfather did not arrive from the village alone. Adriana and Christina watched Christopher walk out onto dry land. In doing so, he pulled the goat behind him on a rope. This scene made the girl and the woman laugh. They watched as the old man tried to pull the animal onto dry land. It turned out, while doing so, it bumps and vomits loudly. As soon as the elderly man managed to do it, then he lowered himself to the ground and panting, said, "And I thought that the most stubborn animal is a donkey. Turns out I was wrong. This goat." Adriana asked curiously, "Why climb into this animal?" The old man grinned and answered that he had long dreamed of a goat because the steamy milk is good for people at his age. And then the man added that Christina also needed to consume this product. Adriana marveled at the words of the healer because he had never brought a goat before. And as soon as the girl appeared, he immediately bought the animal and brought it here. A few weeks passed as the woman lived with Christopher. During this time, she learned how to fish, how to milk the goat. The elderly man himself prepared herbal collections that he gave to the girl from day to day. It was exactly 1 month after Adriana separated from her husband, and the woman started talking in the morning about going to the village. The forester did not interrupt and suggested that they set off immediately. Soon Adriana and her daughter and grandfather were already in the village. They came to the only road that went from the town to the village and sat down on a fallen tree. Adriana often climbed up to see her spouse's familiar automobile, but it was still gone. Hour after hour passed. There was already a bus that came here once a day, but there was no Stephen there either. The woman looked dejectedly at the road and intuitively realized that she would not see her husband today. Adriana turned to Christopher. Perhaps my husband had arrived earlier when we were on the road. He must have waited for us, and without waiting, left. I don't know what to do now. If you want to spend the night here in my house, I'll take you back to town tomorrow. But my daughter still has to drink your potion for a month. Maybe in a month we'll sail early to the village, and I'll meet my husband. I'm not sure, she suggested. Have it your way. And now it's time to go to our lair to make it before dark. Time moved on, and another month of Adriana's life in this godforsaken place was approaching. A few days before going to the village, the woman had asked an elderly man why he was dwelling. Here an old man sighed sorrowfully and pronounced that it was a long story. Adriana touched the woodsman's arm and said that she had plenty of time. She asked him to tell her about his life. Christopher made himself comfortable on her and began his story. Christopher was born in a family where his parents worked as doctors, and when he grew up, he also chose the specialty of medicine. But only the young man decided to become a paramedic. He was invited that he would rush in an ambulance to save someone's life. And in a short time, Christopher graduated from the educational institution and got a job. The young man worked a year in an ambulance, and then he got a call. He went to the exit of the patient was a 19-year-old girl, Clara, who had a heart condition. She was rushed to the hospital. As the girl was being wheeled on a gurney to the hospital, Christopher suddenly shook her hand and told her that she would be fine. After this call, several days passed, and the young man could not forget the eyes of that girl, and he decided to visit her. The man easily recognized the ward where the patient was lying and soon stood near the girl's hospital bed with a bag of fruit and a bouquet of flowers. Clara immediately recognized the paramedic and asked him, "What are you doing here?" "I decided to visit the pretty maiden." Don't say flattering words that you don't believe yourself. In my orphanage, they used to call a lock a lid to my face. They're stupid people who didn't see your beauty. And then Christopher, with the girl's permission, sat down next to her, and they began to talk. Initially, the young man told about himself, and then asked the new acquaintance about her life. She was embarrassed and said that she did not have much information to tell about herself. But Christopher insisted on his own, and the girl said that she did not know her parents, as her mother abandoned her in the maternity hospital. After that, she went to an orphanage, where she spent her childhood and adolescence. And after the state allocated her a one-room apartment, and she then went to medical school. After this visit, Christopher more than once came to the girl, and when she was discharged, he himself took from the hospital. From that time, the young people began to meet a month after meeting. The guy confessed his love and offered his hand and heart. The girl responded with consent. And as soon as the man heard the word beloved, he said, "You are my marriage cap for life, and I won't give you to anyone. But there is one thing. I know that you work part-time as a nurse at night. Well, you're quitting tomorrow. That kind of work is not good for you. You study in the morning and work at night. What do you say, future husband?" Soon the couple applied, and then had a modest wedding. Christopher moved to live with his wife, and the young people began to master family life. At first it was not easy, as there was often not enough money, but the newlyweds tried not to fight about it. And strangely enough, they succeeded. After a while, she graduated from college and got a job as a nurse, and at the same time, Christopher expressed a desire to become a doctor of homeopathy. He entered the institute by correspondence, and after some time acquired a profession, on which he began his labor activity. And at the same moment, he learned that his wife was in a position. For the couple, it was a joyful event. They were already dreaming of a baby. After a while, Slaga gave birth to a healthy baby boy, who was named John. The son grew up a healthy boy to the joy of his parents. When John was 3 years old, he was enrolled in kindergarten. Christopher thought that he was the happiest person because he had a woman he loved and a son he loved, as well as a job that gave him pleasure. As the years went by, when John turned 14 years old, his grandparents passed away suddenly within a year. Christopher then moved with his family to live in his father's apartment. It was decided to rent out the one-room apartment and save the money for a summer house. Some more time passed, and John graduated from school with a silver medal and then entered medical school. The parents of the young man were happy for their son and dreamed that he would become a highly qualified specialist in the future. However, the happiness of the family broke overnight. John began to feel ill when John was studying in the 3rd year. The woman was examined and a brain tumor was added to the heart disease. Christopher, as if was crushed by this diagnosis, but the man in no way showed it to his spouse. Soon she was put in the hospital. She lay there for some time, but the attending physician said that it was better to take the woman to a Moscow clinic. Christopher, having collected his savings, immediately went to the capital. The woman underwent many necessary procedures. A lot of money was spent, but nothing helped. She was getting worse day by day. The son demanded that his father take his mother abroad, and Christopher was already ready for this. He sold his car, as well as the dacha, which had recently been purchased, and was preparing for the trip. As he was approached by his wife, who said, "Don't go abroad. I will not survive this trip. You are a medical professional yourself, and you understand everything. I don't have much time left. It is better to leave these finances, son, and do not get angry at him that he insists on traveling abroad. He's still a young and hot guy. As they say, life doesn't burn him. Don't talk nonsense. We'll get you back on your feet," the man said firmly. "Don't talk about it. Try your own strength to cure me. They say love heals. Maybe you can do it. I just want to spend my last days with you and know that my 2 favorite men are doing well." Christopher looked at the woman he loved and tears involuntarily ran down his eyes, which he could not stop. He realized that she was telling the truth about the fact that his wife had only a few days to live, but it hurt him that his beloved knew about it. After all, she's a doctor. And Clara, seeing the tears of her husband, quietly said, "Do not mourn for me if I go to the next world, then with a peaceful soul, because we lived a life worthy. You better buy a house somewhere and let me spend the rest of my days there, where you will feed me with healing creatures." "All right, my love, I will." Christopher told his son of his decision. John, when he found out that his father was going to go to the backwoods instead of abroad, was furious. They had a big fight between them, and in the meantime, Christopher quit his job, and he was already the head of the hospital there. And then he found a small village where he bought a small house and moved there with his wife. The woman lived in the village for a little over 6 months. Christopher prepared a potion for his wife, but realized that it was all useless. And often at night, when the chosen one fell asleep restless son, he went out into the yard and quietly whimpered because he could not change the situation. Died in the early morning, but before that the woman managed to say that she loved her son and Christopher very much, and also asked her husband to bury her in this area. She said it was beautiful and easy to breathe. After these words, she took a deep breath and fell asleep forever. Christopher fulfilled his wife's request and stayed here for good. He did not want to leave his native and beloved man alone after 2 years, as he did not become a wife. A man in the city learned the courses of a forester and got a job in the forestry, having moved into the wilderness. After this story, Christopher looked at Adriana, who was sitting, breathless, and tears were streaming down her face. It was as if the young woman could feel how this older man had gone to any lengths to be with his beloved forever. The forester touched Adriana's arm and looked at her carefully. The girl did not know what to say to this man, nor could she, since there was a lump in her throat. Christopher patted Adriana's hand and said that the time was late and it was time to go to bed. A few days passed, and Adriana and her grandfather and Christina went to the village again. The woman did not really hope to see her husband again. She didn't understand why she felt this way. The forester's story kept replaying in her mind, and Adriana involuntarily thought that it was Christopher's story that prevented her from believing that her husband would appear before she got into the motor. The girl suddenly inquired of the elderly man, does the son know that it was Clara who wished to settle in the village? The grandfather looked sadly at Adriana and shook his head negatively. And then he heard another question from the woman he was talking to. How often do you see John? We parted in an uneasy relationship. I've lived here for almost 12 years now. And in that time, John has been twice. Every fourth year he comes for 3 days. My son told me himself that he would come every 4 years. Why that number, I don't know. He's supposed to come next summer. Soon the man, woman, and child were already in the village and sitting in the tree again. Adriana did not jump up to see if a car was coming along the road. Then a man passed by them who was taking Adriana and her daughter to the place where the healer lived. The girl told this to Christopher, who immediately stopped the fellow villager and said, do you not remember? Prokopovich took this person with a child to me a couple of months ago. I remember, of course. What happened? Tell me how he acted. I can voice it in front of the young lady. You're not sure? Asked Lawson. You can, and you should. Adriana said boldly. He was a strange guy. He paid double cab fare and told me not to say anything to his wife. I thought he was coming with us to take his wife to her destination. He's got some kind of seasickness thing going on. Any reasonable man wouldn't let a beautiful woman go alone with a stranger. You see what he did, Lawson said. Christopher looked at Adriana, who smiled sadly, and then said that it was time to go back to the goat. And then she added that it was very difficult to milk in the dark. The woman took her daughter by the hand and went first to the river. As soon as they reached the motor, the forester turned Adriana to face him and said, I understand that you have made conclusions for yourself. What are you going to do? Treat my daughter further. You said that 2 months to drink from Varia, and then a month of rest. That's 2 months gone. Now we'll take an active vacation. Trying not to cry, mumbled a young woman. Do you mean that you are ready to live here for a few more months? Of course I am. It's all for my daughter's health. You don't understand. As in your life story. I've had my whole soul ripped out of me. I would have done anything to live with Stephen. I couldn't imagine living without him. And I realize now that he doesn't need me or my daughter. After all, a loving man would have wanted to know how his wife and daughter were living all this time. And here is silence. You left everything for your beloved and came here. You had a prestigious position in the city, surely a good position in society, and you even the desire of the woman you love went to conflict with his own son. And I have nothing to expect from Stephen, since I'm nothing to him. I'm sure this man is now tumbling around with my ex-girlfriend, and he's free to keep it that way. What's important to me right now is to cure Christina, and then we'll see how I move on. You need to think about your decision with a clear head, and they're emotional right now. Now let's go home. It is really uncomfortable to milk in the dark, the old man said in reply. The next morning, Adriana was the first to get up. She went out of the hut and looked at the nature. She liked to contemplate the forest and breathe in the fresh air. And at that time, Christopher approached her quietly and asked her how she had slept last night. The girl turned to the older man and answered that she had slept better than ever. And then the forester asked, "Now you must decide for sure whether you will stay here or be taken to town. You need to know that now, because very soon summer will be over and fall will come. It can be hard to get out of here. It's often hard to get out here. It rains so hard that the river overflows its banks, and in winter there is a blizzard that you don't want to show your nose from your hut. I told you yesterday I'm staying. You taught me how to fish, and now it's time for me to learn how to hunt. Although I guess it's not really my thing. If you've made up your mind, you're a good girl. Now it's just a matter of building a barn for the goat, making hay, and of course, buying you appropriate clothing for the season. There's something for you in my lake car stuff, if you're not squeamish, of course. Christina, on the other hand, will have to buy everything new. Of course, I won't be squeamish. What are you talking about? You know, I feel bad. I don't even have the money to pay for it. Oh, wait a minute. Here's the engagement ring and the gold earrings Stephen gave me. You could pawn all that jewelry and you'd have money. Stop talking nonsense. I have the means. How much do I need on my own? I haven't spent much over the years. I wanted to give it to my son. I gave it to him, and he gave it back to me. So save your gold for a rainy day. Next Thursday, we'll go into town, do a little shopping. We'll get Christina a doll and buy her some books. And I made the Barbie nursery myself. It won't be worse than the store ones. Time flew by. Autumn passed, and then winter came. Adriana enjoyed watching the seasons change, and in each month she found its own charm. What did the latter man often talk about? The elderly man listened to her interlocutor and told her that she had a talent for writing. Because of the way she painted colorfully the seasons, soon it was spring. The man started the vegetable garden. Adriana was helping him with it. Christina also demanded that the adults give her a job. Christopher, in order not to offend the child, gave the girl millet and asked her to pick it. Initially, Christina did it with passion, but soon she got bored with it and demanded a shovel. This statement puzzled the forester, and he promised the child that as soon as Thursday came, he would buy her a children's set of vegetable gardeners and set aside a special place for planting. Spring flew by and summer came. The young woman already realized that it was impossible to stay here forever. In just a couple of years, Christina would have to go to school. Adriana knew that Christopher was thinking about it, too, who had already gotten used to having Adriana and the little girl, whom he loved as his own granddaughter, living next to him. So Adriana decided that it was time to talk to the forester about her return to town. She was going to do it in the morning, but as soon as she got up, she saw that the old man was going shopping. And she damned their news to herself, since she had completely forgotten that it was Thursday and her grandfather was going to town. The elderly man asked what to buy, and the girl quickly wrote a list of groceries, which she held out to Christopher. Soon the forester sailed off to the motor. The woman decided to clean up the hut. The more so her daughter was busy drawing. The girl collected half and raised the floors, then washed everywhere and looked over her work. After that, Adriana began to prepare the first course. She habitually made a fire and put water on the fire in the column. Somehow she heard the roar of a motor. The girl thought that another fisherman went fishing. However, the motor swam to the shore and a middle-aged man came out of it. The stranger looked at the young woman with surprise and asked what she was doing here. Adriana was outraged by this question. And Adriana said, "You are the one who owes me an explanation as to why you came here." "Good acquaintance. Well, I'll start by explaining. I'm here to visit Christopher's father." The young woman stared at the forester's son with all her eyes and then splayed her hands and said loudly, "So you are John," and immediately added sternly, "Good son. He doesn't know what's wrong with his father, and he comes once every 4 years. Wow, I'm getting hit on by a wood nymph. This is a very interesting situation," the man said with a chuckle. "I won't stop you from having fun. Tell the father that his son came," and he opened. John stopped talking as he saw Christina come out of the house. The man was silent for a while, but then he said, And this is my father, who pretends to be a devoted husband to my mother, when he has already made a child." After these words, John turned around and went to the motor. And immediately afterwards I heard, "Such asses as you, it is necessary to search for more. Your father is a golden man who still loves Clara. That's the only reason he lives here and doesn't move to the city. And you should be ashamed of yourself for thinking so badly of your own father. What did you say? You don't know anything. Dad brought Mom here when the doctors could have helped her." And the man was interrupted at the same moment by Adriana, who said in a calmer voice, "Shut up, ignoramus, and listen to what I'm about to tell you. Your mother knew she was going to die soon, and it was she who persuaded your father to bring her here. I don't know why I kept it from you, Christopher, but I can tell you with certainty that I have never seen such love as that between your parents." And then the young woman was already telling about herself, how the couple got here after they learned about each other and remembered their acquaintance and laughed. And then the girl asked what John hadn't said when she interrupted him. The man smiled and said that he wanted to inform his father that he now had his own clinic, and at the same moment the couple heard a motor pull up, out of which Christopher got out with his bags. The elderly man saw his son and wept, and at the same time John rushed towards him and began to apologize for being such a stupid man. Soon Adriana was leaving the forester, but not only in the company of his daughter, but also John. The healer's son promised his father that he would show the girl to specialists and in the near future report on the results of treatment. And as it turned out, healing courage actually helped Christina, since the tests turned out to be good. Several years have passed. During this time, Adriana divorced Stephen and married John. They had a child together. It was a boy who was named Ignat. The couple took turns telling Adriana's parents during the summer and then going to the countryside to visit John's father. Only now Adriana realized that she had met a worthy man whom she loved with all her heart and was confident in him in every way. John felt the same way and often recalled their unusual acquaintance, which had almost turned into enmity. And on one of the days of such memories, Adriana said to her husband, "You know, I really want to go to the city where I started college. That's where Christina was born. And I promised I'd show you those places. What's the big deal? You promised. You keep your promise. We'll go through this town, especially since we're on our way to your parents' house, and then to my father's, right?" Happily said the woman and kissed her spouse on the lips. And soon the family was already driving a jeep in the town where Christina was born. The woman asked her husband to park the car and walk. The man complied with the request of his beloved, and in a few minutes the family was already standing on the street. Adriana corrected her sundress. Unshaven took Christina under the arm and offered to walk. John took the 4-year-old son by the hand, and they slowly headed down the street. Just then, Adriana heard a loud exclamation, to which she turned around. The woman looked at the man and recognized him as her ex-spouse. She coldly rolled her eyes at him and wanted to continue on her way. But Stephen exclaimed that he was glad for the unexpected meeting and began showering Adriana with compliments and said that he recognized Adriana only by the tattoos she had made for him, and then pointed at Christina and asked, "This is my daughter. Hear that, banker? At one time you took your wife's bored child to the middle of nowhere and left for a mistress. And now, years later, when there was a chance meeting, you decided to pretend to be a father. That's not gonna happen. Christina has been calling my husband, who is standing next to me, Daddy for a long time. And about the tattoo, thank you for reminding me to look at it soon. Now go on your way and forget about us forever." Subscribe and click the bell.
William Peterson nodded and glanced at his watch, thinking Kelly hadn't called. Hadn't there been time all day? The night shift had not been easy. 3 surgeries was no joke. The man felt like he was a goner. Abruptly standing up from his chair, he took off his robe, cap and all carefully hung in the locker. Once dressed, he looked around the office once more, corrected the folders with documents. He got up, caught on his cell phone, and went out. surgeon of the highest category Kotovsky, liked it when everything lay neatly in its place. Passing the resident, he shouted to colleagues, "I do not have a quiet duty." And going down the stairs, again looked at the clock. Where's Kelly? The alarm beeped. He was about to open the car door. He was called out of breath, by a nurse. "William Peterson, hold on. There's a major multi-vehicle accident nearby. All the victims are being rushed to us. I can't handle a large number of casualties alone." And with both ORs prepped and the car closed, the man hurried back to the clinic. People needed him. It was already the second day the doctor was on his feet, and it was unknown when it would be over. 21 people were admitted to the hospital. Of course, not everyone made it to the operating room. And as they say, thank God, most of the nurses made bandages and determined in the wards. When the doctor arrived and changed his clothes and entered the operating room number 2, he saw a woman on the table. And when he looked at her face, he cried out in surprise. In front of him lay William's spouse, Kelly. He diagnosed several internal injuries, severe concussions, and a very bruised face. Without wasting a second, the vests went to work. 3 long hours the doctor labored, and during this time stopped internal bleeding, did surgery on his leg, removed all the shrapnel from his face. But to be honest, it was even more frightening. It was clear to everyone that if she survived, plastic surgery would be required after recovery. At 5 o'clock, it was all over. 3 could not be saved. They died on the operating tables with injuries incompatible with life. Corver couldn't feel his legs or his back. And when he came out of surgery, William was waiting for him. "I operated on your wife." "What do you mean you operated on her?" "She was in a car accident." Forgetting his fatigue, he flew to the emergency room. Even with bandages and a disfigured face, he recognized his Kelly. The man couldn't hold back the tears. He loved his Kelly more than anything in the world. 18 years of married life, 2 beautiful boys, and love still. He looked at the gauges. While everything was working, his wife was unconscious. Kelly, love. How on earth did this happen? He asked, knowing no one would answer him. The driver of the truck didn't slow down on a curve, and the huge truck skidded. It flipped over and crushed several cars, leaving no chance for whoever was behind the wheel. Kelly was already in the driveway of the clinic, sitting relaxed, listening to music, and didn't even have time to react and slow down. As it turned out, on the hood, drinking out the windshield. The last thing she heard was the chords of a waltz, and then darkness and silence. William Peterson gingerly touched his arm, but he didn't even turn around. "William Peterson, get some sleep. I've put you in the study." "No, I can't leave her." "Don't worry, I'm fine." But finally, realizing that he was tired to the point where he could pass out at any minute, he agreed to go lie down. When he woke up 6 hours later, he scolded the nurse for not waking him up. "So your wife's still unconscious. How can you help her?" I was surprised to hear the nurse justify herself. "Yes, I guess you're right. Make some coffee, please." Well, she brought him coffee and a couple of homemade cakes, which the doctor swallowed without even noticing. "Maybe you should go home. Kelly's alive. If you need a consult, we'll be in touch." And to everyone's surprise, he agreed. Taking his bag, he left the hospital, which felt heavy with an atmosphere of despair and human suffering. Of course, the doctors kept the situation under control, but they were unable to give any comforting information to the relatives of the victims, who came to the clinic and now looked at the people in white coats with tear-wet eyes, pleading. There remained a swift wait. William Peterson showered at home, then called the clinic a couple of times in half an hour, but always heard the same answer. No change. Alive. The man put the cell phone down on the table and directed a blank stare at it. Suddenly the phone rang, making the man flinch. William grabbed the gadget, but his son's name popped up on the screen. "Dad, you're all right," he spoke, in a slightly worried voice. "Yeah, Mom, I can't get through." "Where are you?" In a quiet, scary voice, Dad asked. "At the Institute. I'm going home. We'll find a mom and get together. Come to our place. I have something to tell you." When the children heard about the accident, the daughter's eyes widened with horror and instantly filled with tears. "She'll live." Barely audible, the girl whispered. I can't say for sure, but we have to believe it. The doctors did everything they could. Her condition is stable, but she's not conscious. Now she has to want to come back to us. That's the only way her body will fight back. And he dialed the clinic again. How's the Catalan doing? William Peterson. She's still unconscious. They answered him on the other end of the line. In our case, we should be glad. At least her condition isn't getting worse, said William, disconnecting the phone. But trust, of course, we'll be better off. The medical staff watched Kelly Makarova closely until the morning, but she never moved. Her breathing was shallow and infrequent, and her pulse was weak but steady. Consciousness never returned, and William Peterson began to fear the worst of the coma. By evening, he was back in the clinic and ready to start work. After the second operation came to an end, Corver went straight to the intensive care unit. But the nurse could do nothing to cheer him up. Unfortunately, there was no improvement, but no deterioration either, she said. She hated that William was moving away from the operating table like a man possessed. He walked into the resident's room. Couldn't be alone and the best among men. Let me make you some coffee, the nurse offered, and the man nodded silently. Maria's daughter had put something in his bag that morning. As it turned out, it was sandwiches and 2 apples. He had no appetite, but he ate, realizing that he needed strength to work. Unable to find a place to sit, he went to the emergency room again. For a while, the man stood near his wife's bed, not allowing a close look with the device, and then lifted the eyelid of the right eye. But it was unchanged. Then he put a chair beside the bed, sat down, and took her dainty hand in his big soft palm and said, "To be honest, Kelly, I don't remember how long ago I told you how much I love you. Yes, I do. And I also couldn't do it without you. You should come back, stop sleeping. But you're not a sleeping princess. You're an energetic, creative person. I need you. Me and the kids need you. We miss you very much. Maria, without you, is hitting the sweet spot again, and only you can stop her." He ran his thumb along the inside of her palm. The hand warmed, as if life was being rekindled in it. But Kelly didn't react in any way to his touch. She just doesn't want to come back here, William thought, to the place where she'd been hurt. Dr. Corver should know about such things. In order to escape from pain and suffering, victims go so deeply into themselves that it can be difficult or impossible to come back. 3 more long days passed. William Peterson settled into the clinic. He could no longer tell if it was day or night. He spent all his time either in the operating room or in the intensive care unit. And now he was sitting across from her again, gazing into that dear, once beautiful face. But now she's not vital. Kissing her hands and talking about everything. William was just about to be, despairing, and suddenly felt her hand move. Not much, just a little bit, but it moved. So she can hear him, even though her eyes are still closed. "Good girl, honey, it's me, Will. Can you hear me? If you burned my finger." And oh my goodness, she squeezed. Oh, not so hard, my dear, you'll break it once." He laughed. "I adore you, my love. I await your return. Try to open your eyes. I know you want to see me too." Oh, I tried to lift her eyelids, but it didn't work right away because she had to return to this world as her husband asked her to. The pain immediately pierced her, and she wanted to go back to where it was quiet and nothing hurt. William Peterson realized that it hurt too much to comply with his request. Nina quickly anesthetized the painkiller. "I'm on my way." William Peterson. After the medicine took effect, she opened her eyes and saw this strong man crying. "I'm glad you're back with me. You're a fighter. I've always known that. Everything's gonna be okay now. I promise." William was always not only the soul of the company, but also in the family. He was the center of the universe. He could always make you laugh, encourage you, give you hope. For this he was loved, respected, and trusted not only by his colleagues, but also by his wife and children. Children. How do they quietly ask Kelly? They're worried, they want to see you. I want to see them too. Later, my dear, they will surely come. And the car's pretty wrecked. Yeah, forget about that piece of iron. The main thing is that you're alive and you'll be well soon. I'm sleepy. Sure, go to sleep, dear. I'll come back later. And when he walked into the resident's room with a smile at all 32, everyone present realized what had happened. "She's back with us. Thank you." And he shook his hand wider than that. A few more times he looked in on his wife, but she was asleep. It was only toward evening that Kelly opened her eyes again. "Hi," he said. "I'm glad you're back with me." She made an attempt to smile back at him, but immediately grimaced in pain. "How do you feel the same?" he asked, realizing it was a very stupid question. She wanted to nod, but looked up again in pain. "Head. You have a severe concussion and a small hematoma on the right side." He could see the anguish in her eyes. "I understand, Kelly, you are in a lot of pain," said the husband sympathetically. "They're going to give you some painkillers and you'll feel better." He stood up, walked over to the nurse and said half the usual dose. "Let him stay awake longer." The nurse nodded and went to the patient. In the evening, William Peterson went home. He had to check on the children, even though they were adults, but still the children were more already asleep, and he kissed her hand. "I'll be back in the morning, sweetheart." Kelly, I heard his words, but to open my eyes was no longer strong. It was hard to escape the morphine. And in the morning, when she woke up, she was surprised to find that her husband was beside her and smiling, looking at her with loving eyes. "Good morning." "Oh, darling." "Hello." He understood her lips rather than heard them. "You look much better today," he said. The woman didn't know what was wrong with her face. And William had no idea how to let me know about it. "By the way, the kids are coming to visit you tomorrow." William changed the subject. They'd had a long, hard conversation yesterday. The man explained that Mom still has to endure several plastic surgeries, that her face is disfigured. "But you must not give the impression you are future doctors. You know that the patient in any case should be supported, gives you hope. It's clear, don't worry, everything will be fine." They endured, and the father was proud of his children. But once Maria got outside the hospital, she got really hysterical. "Did you see that?" she screamed. "Yes, I'm even afraid to imagine Mom's condition when she sees herself in the mirror." Calmed his sister down as best he could. A month passed. The hematoma dissolved. Her head also ached. The cast on her arm was removed. The wound on her leg was gradually healing, but her face. It was the first time she realized there was something wrong with it. When her hands were free to touch her cheek, she looked at her husband in horror. "What's wrong with my face?" Hearing this question, William Peterson grimaced as if in great pain. Kelly started. It was he to choose the right words, but the woman interrupted him. "The mirror," she commanded. "I don't have one." "Then bring it. Bring it to me." "A mirror now," shouted the woman. "Honey, you're not alone here. This is a hospital, not a beauty parlor." "You got it." "I'm sorry." She came to her senses a little and realized she'd overdone it. William didn't stop by until just before she went home. "I gotta go. I'll be on the second shift tomorrow. I'll be there at 3 o'clock for tea." And he turned for the door, not even a goodbye kiss. He came back and was already bending down to kiss her when he heard her. "Don't be. I know perfectly well you're disgusted. What's this nonsense? I'll try to sleep at night. And this can all be fixed. I'd like to remind you that a lot of people aren't as lucky as you. And now they're living in a cemetery forever. And you're throwing a tantrum because of your looks. Good night, darling." And he left the room. "But I apologized," she shouted after her husband, but still felt as if someone's invisible cold hand had squeezed her heart. She couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about her husband, about the plastic surgery. Now she was ashamed of her behavior. It was essentially not her spouse's fault. William seemed an endless period that it took Kelly to finally come to her senses. It became especially hard morally when she was transferred from the intensive care unit to the ward. She lay in a separate room and refused to go out into the corridor, so, as the woman put it, not to frighten the patients with her appearance. Recently, she saw herself in the mirror, and it was a real shock. And now it was discharge day. The doctor informed her that all the procedures were finished and Kelly could go home. She still limped a little, but it was a matter of time. The only thing Kelly was concerned about at the moment was plastic surgery. She knew several plastic surgeons already, and she had even written down the contacts of one of them. A friend had recommended it. arguing that everyone who went to him was very satisfied with the result. "Kelly, you should have seen him," Betty said, rolling her eyes dreamily. "I've never seen such a handsome man before. I mean, Alain Delon's a bit of a dud, but I don't think men should be so handsome. Maybe that's why he's in her memory when she gets home, and she'll contact him if he agrees. Wouldn't hesitate to go for counseling." After lunch, William came to pick her up, helped her pack her things, put her in a chair, and took her to her car. At home, her children were waiting for her at the festive table, and she wanted to lie down, but she could not offend her favorite children. After all, she understood how hard they tried. Lunch smoothly passed into dinner, and she, modestly saying that she was tired, went to the shower, after which she felt human. Later, William entered the bedroom. "Kelly, if you want, I can sleep in the other room for now." "Why?" "No, I miss you. Go back to your seat." He put out the light and put Yurka under the covers. "That's better. Or he'll lie down in the other room. She won't be so scared. And in general, be patient. Do the operation. Yes, I love you in every way. But I see how important it is to you, and I'm not talking you out of it. Don't save money on doctors. Pick the best one. Thanks, Vitrenko." She lay on his chest and immediately fell asleep. And when she woke up, there was no one home. The first thing she did was to call almost Alain Delon, but actually Simmons Ethan. But she could only talk to his secretary because, as the latter put it, Mr. Simmons was very busy and needed not only her. "How can you get me an appointment for counseling? Would he refuse to work with me?" Kelly wondered. Why would he refuse? The secretary didn't understand. "But my case is very complicated." "Well, just so you know, for Ethan, there are no complicated cases. He's the best. I know, that's why I want to discuss it with him. Consult in a week and discuss." "Okay, let's make it a week from now. What time is 11 o'clock okay?" "Yes, thank you, I will." A week before the consultation, I knew all about Simmons Kelly plastic surgery and the truth. Handsome, excellent specialist. But here's what really surprised her. He's single. Why would women overlook such a specimen? Kelly pondered. Very interesting. And on the appointed day at exactly 11 o'clock, Simmons took her to tell about the reasons that led to this appearance. Kelly waited for his verdict. The doctor examined every inch of her face long and meticulously. But even after such a close examination, he did not jump to conclusions. He looked through a magnifying glass for a long time, scrutinized every orb. Then he took the photograph and set the date of the operation in a month. Before that, to take all the tests. "Tell me honestly, Ethan, how much chance do I have of regaining my former beauty?" "I'll do everything I can." And he took another hard look at her face. They said goodbye to the doctor. She walked out in the hallway. Her phone rang. Looking at the screen, the woman smiled. It was William. "I just came out of the plastic surgeon's office. Surgery after a month. He promised to return everything back to the way it was." "I'm very happy for you, dear," for she was the only one who was silent for a second. "It's very expensive. We can pay for it. Don't even think about it. The money is my concern." And Kelly immediately calmed down. At home, Kelly surfed the internet every night looking for information about the Simmons. But all the reviews were positive. Probably somewhere in the back of her mind, she wished she could find something not so enthusiastic about the man. But it was all to no avail. Women all as one described what a professional he was in his work, and how after the operation their self-esteem returned to them. And one evening, while Kelly was lost at her laptop, her husband's voice echoed behind her. "Who's that handsome guy you're scrutinizing?" "It's not handsome. It's my plastic surgeon." In an even tone, she replied, "I'm just familiarizing myself with his work." And do you know what conclusion I came to? The husband looked at Kelly expectantly. If it's not Photoshop, then he really is a magician, does incredible things. And I really want to be on his operating table. But he doesn't like my test results. Well, I think you'll make it. William smiled, kissing his wife on the top of her head. The doctor knows what he's doing. I always respect a serious approach. Any self-respecting doctor would value two things, patience and reputation. And the next day, Kelly was contacted by Simmons' secretary and asked her to come in for a consult with the doctor. The repeat test results came back. The cab pulled up to the clinic at 9 o'clock, and she saw Ethan closing his car. It was the first time Kelly had seen him not in a robe, but in a perfectly fitting suit. The gray-colored shirt and tie that had always been an important accessory to a man's toilette caught her eye. Tied in a knot, working as a fashion designer, she'd been interested in that in her day, and hugging himself to the cab she was getting out of, he gave her a hand. "Good morning," he said, and graciously let her pass in front. Kelly appreciated the morning Ethan. She could smell the light and very pleasant scent of his toilet water. It was a scent that had mesmerized her even last time. Now it had become very familiar to her, as if it had accompanied her since long ago. She didn't stay long in the hallway. "Come in, Kelly." He had already changed into his usual snow-white robe, under which he wore the same snow-white t-shirt. He kept peering at her from head to toe, and noted to himself that the woman was quite interesting. "I have good news for you. The repeat tests are normal, and we can set a date for the surgery. But there's less good news. The surgery isn't for another 2 months. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I'm a little behind schedule." He saw her distress and rushed to reassure her. "Don't feel bad, Kelly. Deadlines are relative. 2 months is if you stick to the schedule. But there are always force majeure circumstances and patients asked to reschedule, in which case I can do your surgery sooner. Just be ready at a moment's notice." The man really wanted to cheer up this beautiful woman, so he suggested, "Maybe for a cup of coffee, there's a lovely cafe nearby. Aren't you in a hurry for another surgery?" Kelly wondered. "No. The last day of the month is report day. No surgeries are scheduled on those days. But let's go." But Kelly shook her head no. "You don't go out in public with a face like mine. You just spoil people's appetites. And to be perfectly frank, when I hear you say something like that, I feel like you're mocking me." "Not at all, Kelly." "Well, then it gets a lot worse. Goodbye. I'll look forward to hearing from your secretary." And she quickly left the office. 2 months, the woman pondered on her way out. That's an eternity. Maybe she should consider other doctors with less busy schedules. So once home, she started looking for other clinics. She liked 2 more. And the very next morning, she went to one of them. The doctor welcomed her warmly, examined her face at once, and offered to do the surgery the day after tomorrow. "But do I have time to take all the necessary tests?" asked a stunned woman. "Are you not feeling well?" surprised the doctor. "No, but then I see no reason for a thorough examination. Let's do a blood test for inflammation. Thank God we have our own lab. So we'll have the results in a couple hours, that's all. So do we have a contract?" Kelly didn't say anything. Her inner voice told her that wasn't an option. The doctor's examination was not as thorough as Simmons. Didn't order any tests. And the surgery the day after tomorrow, it's all too soon. As William would say, not a serious approach. "You know, I decided to consult my husband again," she replied after a short thought. "Good," the doctor agreed. Already with less enthusiasm. Next clinic. Kelly decided not to go. "No way," she said to herself. "I'll wait. It's better that way." A week later, Simon got a call from the clinic. "Kelly, doctor, I'd like to see you. Can you come down here, please?" A couple hours later, she was at the office. "Come in, Kelly. I can tell you something. The patient who was supposed to be in surgery the day before yesterday has unfortunately fallen ill. That's basically what I called the circumstances." He said something else, and she thought she was glad to be with this man. Ethan Simmons' great company, especially when there's good news. "Kelly, are you listening to me?" Yeah, sure. The surgery's the day after tomorrow." I honestly couldn't hear the rest. "And then I'm gonna invite you back for coffee. Let's go and sit in an outdoor cafe where it's less crowded and nature distracts from the attention to the customers." Well, okay, she put on again huge black glasses, lowered her bangs, tacks, and said, "I'm ready." Into his huge car she got in quickly so no one would see her. The car smelled of leather and toilet water. Passers-by and stores flashed outside the windows. She didn't even ask where he was taking her. It didn't matter to her now. They sped through the air while obeying the rules of the road. Once on the highway, the car picked up speed, but quickly came to a stop, reaching a scenic area. I don't know why, Simmons muttered as he helped Kelly out of the car. But this little cafe makes mind-blowing coffee. It's worth the drive so far out of town. They left the cars on the curb and took the outermost table. And Kelly sat with her back to all the customers, even though there were only two, a couple in love who didn't need anyone but themselves. Are you comfortable? Yes, very nice and relaxed. I just have to make sure. Is the coffee really that good? You bet. The coffee was indeed excellent, and they drank 2 cups each. Then a brownie, which Kelly couldn't refuse. And then the conversation, which dragged on, and there was no desire to rush anywhere, only to listen. They felt they were becoming more than doctor and patient to each other. It was both joyful and frightening at the same time. Will and the children were waiting for her at home. And the next day at 9 o'clock in the morning, William Peterson drove his wife. Cosmetology went to the clinic. I myself want to look at the doctor in whose hands I give my treasure, smiling, said William. He did not go into details that he made inquiries about this clinic. The reviews about Simmons were indeed good, but he wanted to have a look at the clinic itself. Inside everything was respectable. The secretary is a pretty girl in a short robe. Everything was as it should be. Ethan walked towards them. Good morning, Kelly. Morning. I'd like you to meet my husband, William Corver. Your colleagues. He's a top-notch surgeon. Simmons extended his hand. Pleased to meet you, William nodded, noting the handshake. Why did his heart sound like that? What could have alerted him to this man? The man didn't understand. Kelly calm. What about him? Thank you, Will. I'll take it from here. If possible, William turned to Simon. It's better to use a local anesthetic. She's been under a general recently after major surgery, and her heart is not a fiery engine. I'll take it under advisement, Ethan replied. How can you do that? Give me a call. William asked and kissed her. Ethan watched the whole thing. He loves you, he said softly as the door closed behind him. I love him too. He's a wonderful man. And as I said, a surgeon by God. Okay, Kelly will show you to your room now. Surgery's scheduled for 11 o'clock. I already told you we're not going to get everything done today. It's too big a lesion, so don't expect me to take the bandages off in a couple hours and you'll go to your surgeon. Just be patient. Okay, I got it. At exactly 11 o'clock, they came to pick her up and escort her to the operating room. It was a small, clean, and bright room with all sorts of equipment and instruments. Dr. Simmons was already there. Help the patient to lie down on this table, he asked the nurse. And when she lay down, wearing a mask, I'll check. Ready? I think so, the woman replied, and he nodded to the anesthesiologist. The local anesthetic was slowly starting to take effect, and Kelly stopped feeling her body. From the shoulder up, she couldn't feel her head, as if it didn't even exist. The bright, shadowy lights of the operating room were shining directly into her eyes. The doctor bent over her so low that she could see the color of his eyes and his smoothly shaven and shaven face. His eyes looked confident and she felt at ease. Everything was going well. Talking to her, he spoke to her. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Just be patient a little longer. I think that's enough for today. Talking to her, he did not stop his work for a moment. His hands were plowing in front of his eyes, and she was interested in watching him. The operation lasted 3 hours. Sleep on your back. Everybody rest. And she was wheeled to her room. And he sat up again. It was more work than Ethan had anticipated. But this was an unusual case. It's not just chin or eyelids. There really was jewelry work here. The next morning, he visited Kelly in her room. How are you feeling? Sleepy. Then get some rest. When's the next surgery? But the plan is 5 days from now. But it depends on how you feel. He left the room and she was asleep. William called in the evening and they had a little chat about her well-being and the children. 5 days later, Ethan began the next phase. Kelly wasn't nervous this time because she knew what was going to happen. The feeling was familiar, and she looked up at him and saw his smiling eyes. I see you're not scared at all. That's wonderful. You've survived 1 day in particular. Today is the second. You probably don't know why these days are special, do you? Well, I'll tell you because together we've taken a step toward a new face without scars and terrible cuts. She saw his eyes smile and covered her own. When she opened them, she was already lying in the room. Touching her hands gingerly, bandages, sank back into sleep. And in the morning, Simmons visited her again. "How are you doing?" Kelly's face was mined, but her eyes, looking through the snaps of the bandages, smiled. And she gave him a thumbs up. He smiled back. "Be quicker this time. We'll continue until the day after tomorrow you'll rest. And then we'll make you beautiful. And this is for you, my employee put in the vase brought red rose for your excellent behavior in the operating room." One small step at a time. And William was inching closer to the day that would become Kelly's 3rd birthday. As soon as he arrived at the clinic, the first thing he did after putting on his gown was to rush to his patient's room. Like a magician pulling a flower out of his sleeve and giving it to her, he didn't like her very much today. She seemed a little sluggish. "How are you feeling?" The doctor asked. "Yesterday I was fine, but at night. And at night I felt cold. I think I had a fever. Did you inform the nurse about it?" "No, she hadn't gotten to me yet." "I had a fever, but a slight one." This infection scared Kelly. "I don't think so, but it's worth monitoring." She was wheeled into the OR in a wheelchair. All the stitches were clean. There was no inflammation at the surgical site. And Simmons breathed a sigh of relief. "Are you in any pain?" he asked. "No, nothing. Just a slight fever. Let's wait and see. I'll stay at the clinic today to make you feel better. Or maybe you should call your husband." Kelly offered shyly. "Don't you trust me?" "Well, if I didn't, I probably wouldn't be lying here." "Well, that's great. I think you're overly stressed. Stress can also cause a fever." So he asked the nurse to take the patient to her room when he came in after lunch. She was asleep. Ethan sat up for a while beside her. Her breathing was even. He touched her hands. They were warm. He had a circumferential facelift surgery today. He had to get ready, and he so hated to leave her. But work came first. It had taken him 45 years of his life since birth to become Ethan Simmons, a man admired by women and envied by other surgeons. But men admired him too. It was worth getting to know him. He had many friends among women and men. If he was an enemy to anyone, it was a ruthless one, because circumstances forced him to be so. But even those who envied and hated him could not deny him respect for his golden hands. He was a strong man, ready to fight to the end for what he believed in, and never abandoned his friends. His character was complex, and not everyone could stand him. That's probably why he reached such heights. Ethan's appearance was as impeccable as his reputation as a plastic surgeon. Tall, slender, gorgeous black hair, and with blue eyes that could radiate love and steel, depending on the circumstances. A slight unpleasantness conveyed his appearance and already sexy look. Unmarried. He was only because no woman could stand his work rhythm and the presence of so many beautiful ladies at work. To achieve what he had now, he had to work hard and sacrifice his family. Kelly was therefore understandable. She looked like so many other women at Simmons with adoration. For today, he almost doubted himself. The temperature of his favorite patient confused him. The man was already ready for surgery when a nurse helped him lie down on the operating table. Another patient. An hour and a half later, he returned to Kelly. She had just opened her eyes. "How are you feeling now?" "I think better," she answered in a slightly hoarse voice. He was on his way out of the room when Oli's phone rang. "Will, hello." "Hello, my love. How are you doing?" "Yeah, it's going slow." "Don't worry, guys. We're fine. Can I visit you?" "Honey, I miss you." "No, Will, I'm in a state where there's nothing to see." "I'll meet you at home." "All right, what do you say?" She thought he was offended, but she still felt very bad, so she didn't want to upset him. In the evening, Simmons visited her again. He never went home and took her temperature, which was almost normal. They talked for a long time, both marveling at how pleasant each other's company was to them. They turned out to be very different, but it was all the more interesting to talk. He left her around midnight. "Good night," the doctor said. "I'll come and see you in the morning before I leave." "I'll be waiting," she replied and fell asleep with a smile on her lips. And when he came in the morning, she was very surprised. "Are you without a flower today?" she asked. I see you're in a good mood. Yes, without a flower. Tomorrow there will be a bouquet for that. Let's change the temperature. I already measured it. It's normal. But to be honest, you scared me, Kelly. I thought I'd become a lousy surgeon. You call yourself a compliment. Well, a word of endearment goes a long way with a cat. No, I'm sorry, the cat. You're an excellent surgeon, Ethan. That's why I'm here. Thank you. You've put me at ease. And he leaned over and kissed her hand. Today was Kelly Makarova's last surgery. She's been tired for the past 2 months. The woman had undergone 5 surgeries, short and long, but each one brought her closer to her new appearance. She didn't see herself in the mirror and only believed the doctor's words. Everything is going beautifully. I am satisfied, he told Kelly. One day, William himself called Simmons and, introducing himself, asked permission to visit his wife. I won't be long, I promise. I've only heard her voice for a month and a half. Do you miss her? And there was a note of jealousy in his question. Is it allowed or not? William inquired, letting it pass his ears. Not exactly the doctor's correct question. Of course, come in. I'll leave a pass for you. The nurse kindly escorted him to Kelly's room. Hello, darling. William, how did you get in here? My pass. How are you? It's all tied up for now, but the doctor says it's going well, and he's pleased with the result. But the important thing is that it's pretty. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. You don't know how much I want to go home. Why not? I do very well. We all miss you. I miss you too. He completely forgot about the flowers he brought her, put out fruit, her favorite chocolate. How's work going for you? What, maybe I have a new one, saving people every day, every hour. Sometimes I get the impression that people don't like themselves at all and don't value their health. How many people end up in the clinic because of their own stupidity? It's amazing. All this time he held her hand and stroked her palm with his thumb. She thought he had more gray hair and looked a little tired. Are you from home? No, I'm after night duty and 2 night surgeries. I've noticed that I'm not pretty. No, you're always handsome, even after night duty. He kissed her hand. When the doctor gives you a prescription, he says first I said we'd take the bandages off, and then we'd see what happened. William would have loved to sit and talk to her some more, but he promised not for long. I'm going to go. Kelly will call you tonight. Love you. Thanks for stopping by. It was good to see you. He put the bouquet in a vase where a white rose was already standing. The husband didn't ask where it came from. He didn't want to embarrass his wife, and he was pleased to realize that his wife liked other men, but no more than that. And in the evening, William called to say good night. Simmons came later, and they talked again until midnight. We'll be saying goodbye soon, but you can always call me if anything goes wrong. Well, if you count on that, I'll never call you, Kelly smiled. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Can I just call you for a chat? It's a deal. A week later, she was invited to the dressing rooms. Have a seat, Kelly. We're going to remove the bandages. When all the bandages had been thrown in the hamper, he scrutinized every inch of her face, like a sculptor forming new contours. You know, I'm very pleased with my work. It couldn't have been done better. Quickly hand me the mirror. Kelly's voice was clearly impatient. Kelly, I warn you, the face is still in the revitalization stage. There's some swelling and some beauty, but it will pass with time. A lot of work has been done. You just have to be patient for a little while longer. At your follow-up appointment in 2 weeks, you'll have your stitches removed. They'll be visible for a while too, but again, it's only temporary. Trust me, you heard me. Yes, hesitantly, she said. Only then did he hand her the mirror. When she saw her face, she looked at him and tears flowed. I don't know what you are satisfied with seeing this nightmare, but there's nothing left for me to do. How can I believe you again? The tears rolled like peas, and she couldn't even contain herself. When can I go home? Well, we'll observe you for a week. She interrupted him. 3 days, I'm gone. He didn't want to break up with her, but he realized that he wouldn't be able to keep her for the rest of his life anyway. So he said okay. All 3 days she lay facing the wall. And when he came in, he talked to her back. After 3 days, the swelling had gone down considerably, which made Kelly very happy. but the beauty still held. The night before, she called her husband to tell him she was being discharged. "Can you pick me up?" "Just not first thing in the morning. 12 o'clock would be fine." "No, I want to leave early." "Okay, I'll call a cab. I'll meet you at home." In the morning, she packed her bag, checked all the drawers to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything, and headed for Simmons' office. "Ethan, I called a cab. I'm leaving for home in 15 minutes. "Okay, hold on. It won't be long before the discharge papers are ready." He handed her a document. "I wish you a healthy Kelly. And don't ever come back to us again. Thank you for everything you've done for me." The woman didn't expect him to hug her, and she sighed again. The same delicious perfume enveloping her in his car. "Give me your bag. I'll walk you to the cab." When they left the clinic, the car was already waiting for her. Opening the door, he helped her in and waved her in, but happy. It was the last day of the month. He had paperwork to do, as usual, and there was a lot of work piling up, but he didn't feel like doing anything. "I've gone home," he told the nurse. "We have 2 surgeries tomorrow." "Okay, Ethan." The man drove home in a terrible mood. He missed her already and berated himself for not giving her a ride home himself. When Kelly got home, there was a return apartment waiting for her, dinner prepared. Both kids hadn't gone to the institute, getting ready to see their mom. She was happy to see them, cradling them in her arms. They became quite grown up, but most importantly, the children were healthy. "Why did God send me such happiness?" Looking at them, Kelly said. Lunch turned into dinner, and the family gathered around the table and couldn't get enough of talking. William was happy to see the whole family together. No one was paying attention to Kelly's face, and she had forgotten what it had been like to see her own reflection in the mirror. The children scattered to their rooms, and William talked to Kelly about everything. When the house was quiet, she sat at the table and enjoyed the comforts of home. And in the morning it was getting late. William closed the windows with curtains to keep the sunlight out of his eyes. Thus, he hoped to prolong his wife's sleep, but alas, the day was coming with the noise of cars, sunlight, and the voices of the boys in the kitchen. A little lower. In bed, she got up without putting on her robe, and Kelly wandered around the apartment in her nightgown, enjoying the freedom. Taking a mirror in hand, the woman, carefully impersonating a doctor, examined her face. The swelling was almost gone. There was only a little bit left to beauty. Of course, a great transformation was visible. Now it was even scary to remember what had happened to her face. She was knocking back her coffee when the phone rang. Looking at the display, she saw that it was Betty. "How are you doing? Are you beautiful already, or did the doctor's office not live up to expectations?" "Hello, Betty." "No, the doctor is wonderful. Everyone loves him, and I'm one of them now. He's very competent, and I believe every word he says. I feel great. Thank you for the advice to go to him. And what kind of handsome man did you appreciate?" "Yeah, he's an interesting man. I can't argue with that. But your will is just as good. So you're the envy of the world. I guess you're right about that when you're supposed to shoot in 2 weeks. Great. So we'll set up a meeting later. Everyone can't wait to see you refreshed." "I agree. I miss you guys too." 2 weeks went by fast. Kelly rested, regained her strength, and waited for a call from the clinic. "Hello, Kelly. This is the Simmons Clinic. It would be convenient for you to arrive at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." "Why not in the morning?" "Ethan has a surgery, and then he'll take care of you." Okay. I'll be there." Simmons purposely rescheduled the surgery for the morning so he could take care of Kelly and then take her out to a coffee shop or restaurant to celebrate the successful completion of the surgery. He tried to dial her phone number 14 times in 14 days and then put it off. Speaking of himself, he said he could not interfere in a family where the husband loved his wife so much. It was visible to the naked eye, but he was drawn to her like a magnet, helped by work, and he forgot for a while. Tonight he would finally see her. At exactly 200 hours, she knocked on his office door. "May I?" Yeah, come on in, Kelly. How are you feeling?" Fine. Let's go to the OR," while he put on his gown, mask, gloves. The nurse helped Kelly change and lay on the table. Everything was already familiar, the light of his face quite close and the lights in his blue hair. There was going to be a little complaining, a little unpleasant, Bear with me. There will be a feeling of skin tightness afterward. The slight discomfort will pass quickly and you will be a beauty in a month. All this he told her without stopping working for a moment. When he was done, the nurse nodded and she did her part. You can all get up now, he said to Kelly. The nurse helped and walked out of the operating room. Kelly, do you have any urgent matters to attend to? Asked the doctor without looking at her. No, I'm completely free. Then let me invite you to celebrate the end of our collaboration. I agree, Kelly replied immediately. Feel free to go to the restaurant. And you won't be embarrassed with me, she smiled. Of course not. Well, then I'm not ashamed either. At the restaurant, they took the farthest table. Kelly, you look so beautiful, and that suit looks great on you. Thank you. Offering her hair, the woman replied. It was lunchtime, so it was time to eat. What can I get you? He asked. I want a lot of vegetables too. That's fine. Then I'll have the veal with vegetables too. You can have some wine if you like. I'd support you too, but I'm driving. All right then, red dry. I'm flying to London on Monday, Kelly. I'm going to a conference for plastic surgeons. There's always a lot of interesting stuff there. I took pictures of you and 2 of my other patients. I'll be bragging. Let me know how it goes. Do you really wonder? Ethan looked at her in surprise. Of course I'm curious if they like my picture. Ethan laughed. I can tell you right now that they'll like it. Glancing at her watch, she exclaimed to Ethan, I have to go. Okay, I'll give you a ride. He showed the waiter. He paid for his lunch and, pushing Kelly's chair away from the table, helped her up. He took the longest way to her house. Well, here we are, she said with regret in her voice. Thank you again for bringing me back to life. Simmons opened the car door and helped her out and said goodbye. She looked after his car and waved. A month and a half later, they met at a conference of surgeons, but already in Russia. There was a plenary session, and then the surgeons went to their sections. They bumped into each other at the entrance to the hall. Hello, Kelly, and he shook hands with Vitaly Peterson. How are you feeling? Fine, but I'll be fine soon. And you're interested in surgery now? Yes, I often accompany my husband to such events. That's commendable, and he let her go on ahead into the room. The Orlovsky spouses sat somewhere in the middle of the hall, and Ethan had a short speech at the plenary session and a large, detailed one at the plastic surgeons section. He had to talk about a trip to England. A month later, Kelly went to work. All the sick leave at her own expense was over. She missed her favorite job and the people she had spent 9 years of her life with. Kelly was a good fashion designer. Her success as a fashion designer was determined by her personal qualities. She wasn't afraid to say I don't know, and she loved to learn. Her innate artistic taste, imagination, and flexibility of thought helped her in sketching. She was an innovator. She listened attentively to fashion trends. She was fond of new technologies. The woman did not like to work with ready-made sketches, which were created by designers. She did everything herself. In her models, you could feel the hand of a professional. I adore her chosen field. And every time she looked forward to the upcoming fashion show, she could already see their models being sold out in the stores. Whatever she did at work, she loved it. She was passionate about her work. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she remembered her doctor, and her heart began to beat in a purified rhythm. Kelly considered herself a happy mother and a loving wife, was perfectly content with life and her marriage of almost 20 years. Those years, from the moment she married Vitaly, flew by like a blink of an eye. Very quickly, they became weather parents. Therefore, for 6 years, the young mother was engaged with the children and the house, and it suited her quite well. Household chores never seemed burdensome to her. She was never annoyed by the need to drive and transport her children from daycare. Now that the children were grown, she could do the things she loved to do. But it bothered her to think about Dr. Simmons too often. He missed her dearly, too. He would go to model shows and see her there, always passing the bouquet through someone, but never leaving a note. Yeah, he didn't need one. Kelly knew who the gift was from. Started looking for him with her eyes, but she couldn't find him. She tried to call him a few times, but something stopped her. They met again at the fundraiser and ran into each other in the check room. Good evening, Simmons said. Didn't you and I often find ourselves looking at Ethan, Then Kelly? William inquired. I prefer to do it more often, Ethan replied. He tilted his head slightly. Kelly watched them from the side. He was tall, slender, each handsome in their own way and both excellent surgeons. Will, what are you doing? Doesn't he have a right to be at this party? Who do you think you are? No, he's just not looking at you like a doctor. Well, that's right. He's not my doctor anymore. Don't be ridiculous. You're hurting my feelings. Ethan tried to keep out of the guy's sight, but as fate would have it, they kept running into each other at meetings and conferences. It was like she was testing them on purpose, making their hearts beat faster and blood rush at a frightening rate. They'd almost bumped heads once in a restaurant. Ethan glanced over at Kelly and with a nod, made his way to the table where a lady was waiting for him. Why did Kelly's mood immediately sour? Why did she find the woman so unworthy? Ethan. Asking herself these questions, she didn't even try to answer them. And so a year passed. The Simmons Clinic flourished. He was even forced to take on an assistant to a promising young surgeon. At once it became easier, and he wished he had done it sooner. For the spring model show, he showed up with the same lady. He was afraid that if he was alone, he wouldn't stand for it and would approach Kelly. But he realized he had no right to do that. And she looked backstage and searched for him with her eyes. And finally, she found him. He was sitting directly across from the model's exit, and Kelly saw the same lady next to him. No sooner had she pouted her lips than a bouquet was brought to her. Again without a note, but again she didn't need one. The woman already knew everything. She quickly grabbed her phone before she changed her mind and dialed a single word. Thank you. She watched him from backstage. He opened the message, smiled, and hid the phone. But the smile, she thought, was sad. It had been a year and a half since the surgery. Looking at her face, she thought it had always been like that. That morning, she was getting ready for work and putting on light makeup. It was quiet. The kids were getting ready for the institute, and Maria Mom's sudden shout of "Where's my wallet?" made Kelly startled. Her hand trembled, and she scratched a piece of skin on her face with her fingernail. Clamping the wound with an alcohol-soaked cotton pad, she hailed a cab and drove to the clinic. Simmons they met in the hallway. Something was wrong. She put the disc away. She got the disc. I accidentally nicked it with my fingernail. And I don't think I'm worried. Now get dressed and let's go to the OR. I had to put in a neat little stitch. It's no big deal. It's uncomfortable, but it's not fatal. Don't worry. You'll have to wear a Band-Aid. Come back in 2 days. I'll take a look. You can get up now. You write the bill. I'll pay everything. He nodded and went into the office. When she came in after him, he turned sharply to her and said, I've missed you, Kelly, and I've wanted to see you all the time. I missed the look of your voice, the smell of you. He continued to say something, making her lose herself in reality. I can't do it without you. I've tried, but it doesn't work. I missed our conversations too. He wrapped his arms around her, and she didn't want to push him away. Ethan. It felt like if he broke the embrace now, he'd miss her forever. I've tried to stay away from you, but it's not working. I love you, Kelly, he whispered, looking into her beautiful eyes. I probably love you too. Even more quietly, the woman said, and he put all the tenderness and love he had for her into his kiss, and she responded with just as much desire. Now they were doing what they had forbidden themselves to do for a year and a half. Perhaps their time had come. It was a derangement of reason. Obsession, mad infatuation, obsession, passion. You could call it all sorts of things. But they didn't linger now. Nothing needed to be said. They felt everything. After a year and a half apart, Ethan and Kelly became lovers. Ethan, hi. I finally got you on the phone. How are you? Better now. Do you want me to fly up to you? I'd love to. I need someone to share it with, someone to talk to. I'm wandering around the house like a ghost. Aren't you working? No, I'm working now. Otherwise, I'd probably go crazy. Okay, I'll call you as soon as I get the tickets. I'll be really looking forward to seeing you. Thomas was a childhood friend, the one and only for life. At first, they had lived near each other, gone to the same kindergarten, then sat at the same desk at school and fought off the local bullies together. They went to college together. Although Thomas didn't really want to go to medical school, he decided to go with his friend. 6 years at the institute brought the boys even closer together. His friend did not work as a doctor, but organized his own clinic, where excellent specialists worked. He turned out to be a great organizer and administrator, and the inheritance left by his parents helped in opening the clinic. He had to weigh a lot of things, think, plan, calculate what it will cost him this or that project, and whether the game is worth the candle. And so far, he hasn't been wrong. He had a gut feeling, which did not deceive him. True, the friends were now far apart. Ethan in New York, David in Toronto, but the distance did not prevent the friends from socializing and meeting more often at the earliest opportunity. Thomas was in New York on business. Ethan, having extensive acquaintances and connections, helped his friend to solve unsolvable problems. Thomas had a family, 2 beautiful daughters and a son. His wife worked at his clinic. There were no outbursts of jealousy because, unlike Ethan, Thomas dealt with paperwork and his wife didn't see it as a threat to her marriage. And Ethan was alone again. And at the thought of her, the man's heart clenched. Many women wanted to be near the successful man, but the place really belonged to Kelly alone. Of course, so did Thomas, but in another sense, he had no operations today. But Ethan got up at 700 am anyway, washed and cleaned up, and called the clinic. "Everything's in place," he asked. "Are you ready for surgery?" "Yeah, we're good." "Ethan is ready and everything is in place. Call me if anything goes wrong." "Okay." Cell phone rings. It's a house. He bought it for her to live here, to breathe the forest air, to swim in the small, clean river in the summer. And now this house he hated. It was empty and cold without Oli in it. Ethan hadn't felt so happy in years. And never in his life had there been a woman like Kelly, beautiful, exciting. Simmons fell in love with her as soon as he saw her. And they didn't even know each other. She's a patient, a married woman with 2 grown children. He's a doctor, but once they talked, they both realized they were attracted to each other. Ethan admired her ability to look both sexy and elegant at the same time. He was pleased to realize that such an interesting woman was in love with him. Kelly, on the other hand, thought that everything that happened between them was a special atmosphere. The doctor saves the patient and gives her back her beautiful face. Kelly wanted to believe in what was happening between them. She wanted to believe that everything that was happening, that what was going on between them was sincere. She had never had another man in her life other than her husband, and he was the only one she felt the most important relationship with. Competing with William was difficult. Even a very handsome, reliable, intelligent, and charming man. He loved his Kalinka as he had the first day they met. But Ethan had turned everything in her mind upside down. They had always been good together. This woman was to him the embodiment of everything a man could dream of in his life. Kelly was his fairy tale princess, not only beautiful, but also smart seductive. All in all, the best. They were crazy about each other. She gave Ethan that special state of mind that made him want to move mountains. They enjoyed each other's company. He had never imagined he would be so happy with just her presence. Ethan would never forget the time spent with her. In the evening, Thomas called again. "I leave tomorrow at 8 p.m. I've got the number. Tell me I'll meet you, but it'll be at night." "Yeah, I don't care, I don't sleep. I'd rather meet you." "Okay, well, whatever you need me to do to get there myself." Now Ethan slept only before the operation, taking sleeping pills to make him sleepy in the evening. Today, he was on his way to meet a friend. He was glad to see him. It was quite dark outside when he drove out of the house. It was still about 40 minutes until Thomas arrived, and he was excited to walk around the lounge. Looking at his watch, he heard the airplane. When he looked at his watch, he heard that the Toronto-New York plane had landed at the airport. Ethan hadn't seen Thomas yet, but he was already smiling. "But it's taking a long time. Our friend didn't come out for a long time." Both Ethan and Ethan craned their necks, looking for him. "You'll be looking for me for a long time." There was a familiar voice behind me. Ethan turned around, looking at you with all his eyes. "Well, hello, friend. It's good to see you," and they hugged. "I hope you didn't come for 2 days." Ethan asked hopefully, looking at Thomas. 2 weeks. Great. It was said sincerely because Ethan understood how hard it was for his friend to get away, to leave his family and job, and devote 2 weeks to a friend. You don't look good, Thomas concluded. Be thankful I'm still alive. And to be honest, I still don't believe that what happened to me was real. Talking, they quickly reached the house. This is quite a palace, Thomas said when he saw the mansion. It's not too big for you. It is bigger even for my family. I want to sell it and buy an apartment near the office so I can walk to work. That's a great idea. Mr. Plastic Surgeon. While Thomas showered, Ethan prepared a simple breakfast. Ethan made a simple breakfast, and they sat across from each other, drinking coffee and wrinkling their faces at the pleasant smell of the beverage. You go get some rest. I'll go to the clinic. Rest up, Thomas. It's a deal. His friend fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Ethan stopped by the clinic, where he hadn't been for 2 days, but things were going on as usual. Everyone was in place, and everyone was busy doing their own thing. It was literally half an hour. He drove back. On the way, he bought good cognac, meat, cheese, caviar. And when he entered the house, there was silence. Thomas was still asleep. He took care of the meat. He battered it well, roasted it a little on both sides, and put it in the oven. He made sandwiches, sliced sausage and cheese, turned on the TV quietly, and waited for him to come down. About an hour later, Thomas came down a little backed up with bangs of black hair. It brought back memories of sleeping over at each other's houses as kids and getting up in the morning. Exactly the same way. Your place is so quiet, so peaceful. It's quiet in my house. Only at night, when everyone's quiet. That's beautiful, Thomas. Family's important. How long have you known that? I've always known it. The thing is, not all the women could compete with my work. They always thought I loved them less. What do you think? They were right. I guess I've got the meat ready. I'm not much of a cook, so I didn't try anything fancy. I just did the basics. But you're good. I can't even do that, grinned my friend. That's how we live. But you like it, don't you? Yes, but when I get tired, I have a place to run away for 2 weeks. It's harder for my wife. She doesn't have a friend like that. Ethan was smiling. It was like he was alive, and the house didn't seem blind to him anymore. They went into the dining room, and he put his arm around his friend's shoulders. It was a rather spacious room furnished with furniture in soft stock colors. On the walls hung paintings with appropriately themed reproductions. Looking at the paintings, Thomas asked. Ethan nodded. There was a large Kiev palm tree in the corner, and the dining room window overlooked the garden. But there were tempting aromas coming from the table, and the men felt hungry. And you have a very cozy and clean place with someone helping you. The man nodded and pointed Thomas to the table. Ethan couldn't start a conversation about himself, and Thomas didn't rush him. They had been sitting for over an hour, sipping cognac. They took their time, reminiscing a lot. Ethan even laughed, something he hadn't done in 4 months. There was a deep crease between his eyebrows, and his hair was graying. He spoke suddenly, and Thomas prepared himself to listen. It was an important quality in a man. He never interrupted, but was patient and tried to see the situation from the outside. He avoided hasty, judgmental assessments. This created a favorable atmosphere for conversation. Now I know for sure that fate does not like those who have everything. Ethan glanced over at Thomas. I realized this to the fullest extent when yesterday I was a successful businessman and the best surgeon. A full house and, most importantly, a loving, beloved woman. Turns out, what I used to think was love was a big mistake. Can you believe it? I only knew true love with her. With this incredible woman. Why didn't you marry her? Taking advantage of the pause, Thomas asked. 365 times a year, I asked her to be my wife. And 365 times she gave me reasons to postpone it. The children are still in school. If I left, they might drop out. Then the kids had to get jobs. Then my daughter had her first love. Then my husband had a promotion. I had to support him. And so on for almost all 6 years. We dreamed with her about how we would live together, where we would spend our vacations. She tossed herself between her husband and me. It was easier for me. I'm a man, I'm free. She was married. A loving mother. I understood all that and was content to see her. Did your husband guess about your relationship? Ethan answered this question not immediately. There was such silence in the house that one could hear the huge floor clock ticking in Ethan's study. But a hurricane was raging in the man's soul. He was reliving the tragedy all over again. I think he guessed. He even came to my clinic. We had a very long talk. Quietly, calmly, and let Kelly decide for herself. But she didn't come to me right after our first explanation and our one kiss. She disappeared for 2 months. She didn't even come back for the shock. Then I found out that William had done it himself. I had no right to rush her, realizing how hard it was for her to decide. On one side of the scales of 20 years of married life, 2 children, and a loving husband, and on the other a love affair that flared up. Perhaps she was expecting that this love that flared up so quickly would extinguish even more quickly. But it didn't, and one day she came to me on her own. Can you imagine that day and hour I remembered for the rest of my life? To give his friend a break from the heavy memories, Thomas raised a shot glass. "Ethan, let's drink to your happy future. It's impossible without her," he said, in a shaky voice. Anything is possible in life, and they drank. The bottle of cognac was long since empty, and both men were completely sober. The first time she called me "if" was when she burst into my apartment after 2 months away. "If, I can't be without you." She said it then. "I've tried, but I can't do it." And she hugged me. At that moment, I was the happiest person in the world. She stayed with me until late afternoon and went home. I didn't want to let her go. You can't imagine. I loved everything about her. I adored her. I didn't even realize you could love each other so passionately. I could hardly concentrate on my work. I enjoyed giving her gifts. To fulfill her every whim, and she didn't want much. You know the song, "There's a sweetheart around." That's the one. A year went by like that, but nothing changed. We used every minute to be together. We didn't know how to handle it. Kelly thought it would all work out in time, but time passed. The knot was getting tighter and tighter, and she couldn't find a solution. I loved her so much that I was ready to let her go when I saw her suffering. But she wouldn't even hear of it. "I can't be without you, Ethan. I need you. So move in with me, and it'll be easier for everyone to put an end to this." That's when she started crying. I know, she'd interrupt me, but I can't do this right away. I have a life. Kelly, I mean right away, it's been almost 2 years. She'd start crying again, and I couldn't stand her tears, and I'd immediately apologize for pushing her. As he was saying this, he didn't notice the mountain of torn paper napkins that lay beside him. He was tearing them with fury. Thomas didn't touch him, realizing the man needed to vent his negativity, and all your dreams of living together remained a dream. He asked. Yes, they were. It didn't work out. We kept seeing each other every spare minute. I bought this house for her to be more outdoors, to relax, but she always thought about her children, who also arranged her scandals and expressed their discontent. And after another domestic scandal, she disappeared again for 2 months. I called her to see if everything was all right. Yes, she replied in her iron voice, I was fine. I remember that night I got drunker than ever. On principle, alcohol is the anesthesia that allows you to undergo the operation called life. I didn't want to live, but I didn't make any claims against her, realizing she was having a harder time than I was. After a couple weeks, I started to let go, and I was working like crazy. It saved me a lot. I took on the most complicated surgeries at the time when I was so stressed, and I had a great result. I was surprised myself, but the patients were very satisfied. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Ethan, you can come to the clinic right away. Something's happened. Yes, there's something wrong with a patient here. Okay, I'll be right there. He washed and cleaned up, called a cab. Thomas, watch TV. Give me a break. I'll be right back. But Thomas decided to look around the house. It took him an hour. He went into Ethan's study. It was in perfect order. Only a few white sheets and a pen were out of order. They were poems. Even Thomas didn't know that Ethan's writing on poems was them again. As he read through the outline, he realized that he had truly loved this woman and had suffered a tragedy. Ethan came back a couple hours later. Did you get everything sorted out? Yeah, thank God they managed without me. Ethan, I'm sorry, but I've been reading your poems, and I love them. They convey your pain, the depth of the tragedy you've suffered. I didn't know you had a talent for it. It's true what they say. A talented man is talented at everything. But Ethan waved his hand and let's go and buy you some real Indian tea, given by a grateful husband, and they both laughed. For some time they were silently enjoying the aroma of the drink. Ethan suddenly asked his friend, "Tell me, how can I go on living? Nothing pleases me. Not even my once favorite job. Ethan, everything passes. It will pass, and this time heals. Your soul hurts. All you have to do is wait." So what happened next? Thomas asked. 2 months later, she came again. She looked awful. "You don't feel well?" I asked her. "Yes," she replied. "I don't feel well without you." "Then stay." She nodded and stayed. In the morning we had breakfast and felt almost like a family. All the 5+ years we've been seeing each other whenever we had the chance. I think back now and wonder how we managed it. But I guess these things happen. I lived from her leaving to her returning to me and marveled that a year had passed. Then 2, 3, 4. We were good together. But even then, she found reasons to wait a little longer. I didn't consider those reasons to be reasons. It was more like an excuse not to change anything. I had given up all hope of seeing her around as a wife, but 5 years passed, and one day she came to me with a suitcase. When I opened the door to her, I stood like a stumbling block, and she threw the suitcase, hugged me, pressing her nose against my neck. And she was crying quietly. "Why are you crying?" "For joy. Because I decided to take this step, and you're there for me." We talked all night. She told me that William quietly let her go, saying that the sacrifices she was trying to make to save her family were of no use to anyone. Everyone had figured it out a long time ago. "But you know this," he told her. "If you need my help, call me right away." So the point was finally made. And we started living together. She never filed for divorce. I was never meant to be her husband. I made her quit her job. She looked terrible. She couldn't sleep at night. Walked around the house like a ghost. But after 2 or 3 months, she calmed down. She slept again, had an appetite. I hired a cook so she wouldn't cook, but rest. He cooked delicacies for her 6 months later. My beloved came to life, ran up to me. And that's when I decided it was happiness. She was a beacon for me, a guiding star, a light in the window. And I knew it would always be that way, no matter what happened. 8 months of happiness, taking a 2-week vacation. She and I flew to Paris, spent unforgettable days in the city of love. She chose where to go, what to see. But I would have been happy even if we were in a hotel room. We went to the movies, walked around Paris, talked about everything that came to mind. And sometimes we would just sit next to each other and be silent. Feeling perfectly happy, we could talk about literature, painting, fashion, theater. She was a versatile person, and I was surprised to find that she knew as much about painting as she did about fashion. We could talk about our parents, about childhood dreams and youthful desires, and the beginning of adulthood and careers. We were never bored. Women I knew, looking at us, would often say to me later, "What do you see in her? She pales next to you." And I wondered how they couldn't see the beauty of this goddess. She was beautiful. She was absolutely made for me. And then I realized that any even divine perfection causes envy and irritation in mere mortals. So I smiled condescendingly and in a minute forgot what they were talking about. Why has fate treated me so unfairly? Ethan asked Thomas, "Why isn't she here? And I'm sitting here drinking cognac with you. It wasn't supposed to be like this." His friend sat looking at him and thinking how much was still a very deep wound, too fresh for him to think about anything but his loss. The thought of living and enjoying life, Ethan found sacrilegious. Life is such a thing, you never know what's around the corner. Thomas said, knowing full well that it was a poor consolation. As for Ethan himself, he was not relieved by this conversation. On the contrary, he felt infinitely lonely, neglected, unwanted. And Thomas seriously doubted whether Ethan would ever be able to forget his beloved woman. Not even to forget, and at least to stop feeding you for her departure and live with hindsight. He won't be able to let another one into his heart for a long time. After 8 months, I began to notice that something was happening to her. To all my questions, she said she had a slight headache. I looked at the pills she was taking. They were painkillers. Sometimes at night, she'd sit in the living room and watch TV, even though it hadn't been on for a long time. "Kelly, are you feeling sick?" "No, just insomnia." "How's your headache?" Then she started to look better and even had some fun. But after 2 months, her condition worsened dramatically. She held her head and said the pills didn't help. "Should we go to the clinic?" "No, I'm not going. It'll pass now." But I saw that her condition was terrible, and this time I didn't give in. I took her by the hand, and no matter how much she resisted, put her in the car and drove her to the paid clinic. Her complexion, as we drove, had turned a sort of gray, and she looked as if she had aged. I realized, something terrible is happening. "Yeah, I don't need help. I don't need the clinic," she assured me. "Kelly, do this for me so I can rest assured that nothing terrible is happening to you." "Okay, but this is the last time I'm not going to any more clinics. I've had enough of those hospitals." God, I asked then. Only if she was all right, although deep down I was prepared to hear the worst. Even mentally, I was already thinking about what lies I would tell Ola if she was found to have a terrible disease. But God did not hear me because the tests were disappointing. The brain tumor was not opera. "You came too late," the doctor told me, "at least a couple months earlier, and now it's too late. You're a doctor, you can see for yourself. I'm taking her to Germany, to Israel, where they can help. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's useless. Before you torture your wife, send those test results and you'll get an answer. I'm 200% sure it will be the same. Again, I'm sorry. Okay, not the surgery. But it's possible to prolong her life. If not stop, at least slow down the progression of the disease. Let's start the treatment, the medicine, the money, it's all there. Of course, we are not refusing treatment, but you must be ready at any moment. The tumor's too deep, there's a lot of blood vessels. We're not gods either, and we can't do everything yet," the doctor said regretfully. Kelly was admitted to the clinic. I sent her tests to every clinic in the world. In Germany, they refused immediately. In Israel, they gave me hope at first, but then they refused. So I called my friend in the States, asked him to find out everything, sent the tests. They told him to let him come, but we can't give any guarantees. The disease is neglected. Then I called Vitaly and asked to meet him. He only specified where and when. We met in the park. We looked at each other without anger, but we didn't give each other a hand. "Kelly is dying," I said, and he immediately turned pale. "What's wrong?" "Brain tumor." Glioblastoma immediately asked him. "Yes, all the clinics refused to take her. The tumor's not for. You can see the MRI results. I brought them with me at the time, and when he saw them, he cried. We both lost her. The treatment did nothing. And 2 months later, my snail was gone. I still can't believe it, that it's gone. It may sound cliché, but death is hard to get used to, especially since she suffered so much. A terrible death," Thomas said quietly. "For the first month, I didn't know what to do. I felt like a ship without a helmsman, doomed to sail the seas forever and not docked on any shore. I told you fate doesn't like those who have everything. That's why it was taken from me," and covering his face with his hands, Ethan sobbed like a child. Thomas sat there unable to utter a word. He was crushed by the story and didn't know how to help his friend. It was as if Ethan had read his mind. "Don't worry, Thomas. I could have told you all that. So back to life. She's not alive, but I am alive, though I think it's unfair. If, in the opinion of those who knew our history, she did not deserve heaven. At least let her find peace," Ethan said. "Will you be happy?" Thomas took his hand. "Probably, but not for a while.